Fritz,
Here.
Fish,
Here.
Saltzman,
Here.
Novick,
Here.
Hales.
Here. Okay, we have a couple of items. Number 75, please.
Appeal of David Venadia against the noise variance granted to Anderson Construction for the Unico Overton Apartment Project located at the block bounded by Northwest 12th Avenue, Northwest Overton Street, Northwest 13th Avenue, and Northwest Pettigrove Street.
I think we have a member of the Noise Review Board and staff here to speak. I just want to say, appreciate the work that both our volunteers and our staff have done in this case and many others. I think this case kind of demonstrates to me that the system works, and your role in making it work in this case is much appreciated. So welcome David Sweet and Paul Van Orden. I'm not sure who's on first, but we're glad you're here.
I'll jump in. Paul Van Orden, Noise Control Officer for the city. Just a little background. Today we're revisiting an appeal of a staff-approved noise variance for crane operations and early morning concrete pours. In particular, the appellant, David Venadia, asked that City Council overturn one particular item in our noise variance, which was a year-long element that would have allowed up to 10 Sundays of work for crane erections and demobilizations and the delivery of large-size materials. So it was for those two particular elements, the cranes and bringing in large elements. And in our last council hearing on this particular item, council had asked the contractor and the appellant to mediate regarding the Sunday work, and the item was easily resolved insofar as Anderson Construction made a decision that the 10 contingency days of work on Sundays were something they could remove from the table and give the neighbors a respite on Sundays, and that there would not be a need for mediation. So that item was rather easily resolved in terms of their request to do that Sunday work. There were several other items that council asked staff to research regarding this item, and to also check in with the city attorney's office and find out some possible options. One concern regarded the almost ubiquitous EX zoning in the Pearl, and exploring the concern that EX zoning is a mixed-use type of zoning, more or less, that allows a higher decibel level. And in our exploration of the EX zoning, the interesting thing that came out is quite clearly planning is looking at both through the comp plan and more so specifically for Central City elements of planning concerns, what's the best situation in the Pearl for zoning. So there really wasn't a particular avenue for the noise office to push to change the zoning in the Pearl or to make changes to zoning. That compounded with the fact that EX zoning does appear in lots of different neighborhoods in the city, and making a specific change to the noise code to EX would really need quite a bit of research, because you'd be talking about a myriad of neighborhoods that might have one lot, several parcels with EX zoning. So it wouldn't really be a simple fix that would help reduce the decibel level in the Pearl, for instance. Not to mention the concept that the Pearl is someplace that we see as having the beneficial element of mixed-use zone, things happening that EX permits that another zoning or limitation on the decibel level would create some challenges.
Yeah, if I may, David Sweet. The mixed-use zoning task force that's working on issues around mixed use right now intends to roll the EX zone into a commercial zone that will be one of the mixed-use zones. At that point, clearly designated as commercial, we'll be changing the noise code to consider EX zone a commercial zone, which will reduce the allowed noise levels in the Pearl and in other EX zones.
It will reduce it or it will increase
It
it?
will reduce what's allowed
Why?
They will change it.
because commercial zones are allowed to make less noise than industrial zones, and
classified
EX
as
is
industrial
currently
zone.
considered industrial.
Right. Yeah, that will help. Good. Questions for
Paul, I have a
Dave or
question.
Paul?
When did you grow that beard? Dan and I would both have the same reaction, but we were wondering when Paul was going to show up.
It takes about a month and a half. It grows that quick.
Now you can do your work in a stealthy
Yes, it's, until I change the look again.
Undercover.
manner. Undercover.
Undercover noise officer.
So do we have it in writing that Anderson will not be working on Sundays?
Their variance, I might actually have an extra copy. Their variance was changed and it was pulled right out of their variance. So they had a revised variance, which by chance I think I did grab extra copies. And the revised variance clearly states that, well, it doesn't state Sundays. The Sundays are just removed. And let's see if I have an extra copy.
So, Commissioner, the nature of the variance is that it identifies what is allowed. So if Sundays are not included, then Sundays would be off the table.
Thank you. So do we need to enter, because presumably, I mean, this appeal is against the noise variance. This is now a new noise variance. What's the procedural path forward here?
Well, this revised variance was issued to Anderson officially. So this is their official document that says, this is now what your variance has been revised to state, because the noise control officer, in the conditions they originally received, there was or is always a condition that based on complaints and other concerns, we can revise their noise variance. So they've actually formally received this, that these are the conditions they're operating under. So unless Ben happened to say that we need to do something more official, I think we've legally told them that they no longer have Sundays and this is the variance they have to operate under.
And our current noise ordinance and construction ordinances don't allow Sundays, which is why they wanted the variance in the first place, correct?
This is always the tough part. The code doesn't say you absolutely can't work on Sundays. It says that you can't exceed the permitted decibel levels, which basically means you can do things like paint and bring sheetrock and plumbing materials and work inside a building. So they're actually just asking for a variance, not philosophically to work on Sundays, but to make more noise than they can legally make on a Sunday.
And is construction allowed in general that's not noisy allowed on Sundays?
Yes. So what we have to do when we issue citations for people working on Sundays is we actually have to document that the body of work that they're doing is exceeding the baseline permitted decibel levels.
But construction itself is allowed?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And there was a discussion at the previous hearing about forbidding noisy activities such as cutting metal before 6 a.m.
And we did not look to write a specific regulation to the code to write the code in that fashion at this point. That is something that could go through the noise review board. What we focused on more so was the other items I didn't mention were including improving notification and the venue of review, but we did not have a specific dialogue around adding a new component of the code that just limited construction work on Sundays, for instance.
I happened to be there when we were drafting the noise code in 1975, 76. And the idea with construction was that there are certain construction activities that are so loud that we couldn't set a reasonable decibel limit for them. So we set restricted hours instead. And so the permitted hours are 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Saturday. And within those hours, the sound levels permitted from construction are very permissive. Outside of those hours, they are the same as they would be for a rock band, an air conditioner, a stereo.
So in fact, we do already have code saying that you cannot saw metal at 5
6
o'clock in the
a.m.,
morning.
no, you cannot.
So then what's the penalty for that, for having done
If
so?
it's a first citation, it's $300. If it's a second citation, it's $1,000. Third citation, $3,000, and after that, it's $5,000 for every citation after that. There is a philosophical dispute, which is part of the reason we're in an appeal today, that I think that many of the citizens you may be hearing from feel that the noise office is not issuing citations quick enough or in a large enough number on construction projects. So I think there's a little bit of a question that I don't know will easily be resolved here. And that's why in the last hearing, I tried to illustrate that just in the year and a half since there has been a transition from BDS to ONI, we've issued more citations in the noise office than we did in 5 or 6 years previous at BDS. So I'm not sure as staff, I'm obviously potentially biased, but I'd say that kind of improvement in a 25-year and career in environmental law enforcement is a pretty good statistic to show that we're serious about issuing penalties.
It is indeed. Even with or without beard, there is only one of you. And when I was in the commissioner in charge of the Bureau of Emergency Communications, noise complaints tended to get pretty far down the both BOEC and the police response. And so we do rely on the police to respond at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm wondering, looking to my left and my right, the commissioners in charge of police and BOEC, if there can be a directive that for egregious noise violations, not just your noisy party, but for things that are actually specifically called out in code, such as not sawing through metal at 5 o'clock in the morning,
Right.
that there could be some directive that, in fact, police would respond and cite.
Already underway, actually. I'm glad you brought that up because Chief O'Day has directed that Deanna and in my office and Paul will be working with the Bureau for additional training for officers on noise enforcement. So there may be only one of him, but there are a lot of people out there every day on behalf of the city in the form of police officers who should be assisting in the enforcement. So
Right.
that's in the works. It's something that Chief O'Day believes we really ought to be doing in terms of neighborhood-based policing, and I agree.
Yeah, well, especially for our downtown folks where, well, anything adjacent to a construction site. And if you, as the commissioner in charge of police, could make sure that the BOEC dispatchers are aware that, in fact, the police will be prioritizing these kinds of noise complaints. I know in the past it's kind of like been, well, they may not be able to come within the next 2 hours, by which time it's long past when the construction hours are over.
Yeah.
So I'd like that. So just going back to notification, Paul, where did you get to on notification?
So improved notification as requested by council. In the short term, we tried to work with Anderson because they have several projects going on at once, as well as now Walsh Construction within close proximity to the same area. Their last request to do some early morning concrete pours, we actually had them do notification to all the surrounding buildings within a 2.5 block radius. They handed out approximately just under 1,000 notices to those buildings. And then we followed up by requiring the folks at Anderson to give us a business card from each building so we knew the person they reached out to and dropped off the notices for the tenants, because it's not always a possibility to literally get them into the hands of the tenants, and they can't put them in people's mailboxes legally. So we followed up and called those businesses, or those building managers, I should say, and found that about a third of them had not yet passed them out to the neighbors. So the notification element, the part of the equation that Anderson had to take care of, which is delivering the notices with an appropriate number, was verified to have been done correctly. The buildings passing them out to their tenants, we had some concerns that they weren't passed out until we actually called and said, we really need these in the hands of the tenants. That doesn't fix the problem completely in terms of notification directly to the tenants. Mailing could be a potential way to do business. The challenge there would be for a basic noise variance that might be 1, 2, 3 days of work. The mailing notification would be 2 to 3 times the cost of what the noise variance is. So if council wanted us to go down that road, we could explore changing our notification component to require direct mailing to each person within a noise variance, but that was not where we arrived at this point. The second component of notification improvements, council, in our dialogue last meeting, we discussed the concept of trying to get a weekly notice out to neighbors. And so 2 things we're doing in that area. Kathy Couch, who's our main program specialist, she's taking a class in February to be able to use the city's webpage to post weekly our weekly notification of what variances have come in. And we're still trying to iron out how we're going to email out a list, because we're in the process of changing one of our other staff folks, Patrick Owen, who would normally be our person, to email out to all the neighborhood coalitions, interested parties, a list of the variances that come in that week. He's now segueing over to crime prevention, so we're in the midst of getting a new person and getting that person trained up. So that will be the other component of weekly emails, as well as posting it on the Donny website.
I appreciate that it's going to be posted on the website. However, if I'm a resident downtown, I'm not going to be checking your website every week to find out whether or not there's a variance. And similarly, if I'm a neighborhood association volunteer, I'm not necessarily going to take it upon myself to get that email and find out who's the proper authority. I thought we had discussed something like posting a notice in the elevators or some other kind of public place.
As a matter of conditions that we're going to be putting in noise variances, they're going to actually have to have the formal noise variance on site, posted on site, because realistically, we've had some challenges with getting building folks to post them. It's not very hard for someone to take it down. It's the same component as giving it to a building manager, and they're not getting passed out. So when I explored this concept, I'm not sure how, from a staffing perspective, I can be completely sure, one, that the noise variances were passed out to the neighbors, or two, that they're posted in an area where someone can see it. So it seems like the more appropriate way to do it is to have it right on site. When someone walks out, they'll see, just like a land use notification, they'll see a notice that says there's a noise variance on file, and since they're fairly succinct documents, someone can actually see the actual variance and see the conditions. And the benefit we chatted about last meeting is if an officer responds and a neighbor's frustrated, they can actually, instead of something in their building, they can point and say, there's a notice right there and it says no work on a Sunday. Or there's a notice right there and it says saw cutting will cease at 9:00 p.m.
To be clear, all major construction projects long-term, such as the Selwood Bridge, the painting of the Broadway Bridge, major ODOT projects, do come before the Noise Review Board. We do require the applicant to mail notices within the area that we expect to be impacted by them, and we do hold a hearing on those. So here we're talking about variances that are ordinarily issued over the counter by staff. And I have asked that where it's feasible, all construction variances in the Pearl District at this time be referred to the Noise Review Board for adjudication. And we are asking the applicant to distribute notices. We're not asking for mailed notices, which would be very expensive, but we are asking them for construction noise in the Pearl, that they distribute notices within a reasonable impact area. And we do hold a hearing. We have one coming up tonight where we'll consider a variance for 7 concrete pours and a crane disassembly between now and May.
I'm pleased to hear that you're going to have all of the projects in the Pearl referred to the noise board, because my understanding is that 98% of the current applications are done by staff rather than going to the board, and that the board chair gets to choose which they listen to and which they don't. So Mayor, I'm really concerned about, this is a specific case. I'm glad it came to council because it's highlighted a number of the issues that we as policymakers need to have discussed. Where are the written down administrative rules or understandings or resolution of all of these issues that we would then adopt into findings and give directions to staff at the very least to move forward?
I don't know if we have to adopt findings in this case, because it's not a strictly speaking a land use case, it's a code compliance case. But nevertheless, the question of how do we enshrine the work that's been done here in some kind of
Because it's not just this
Right.
project.
No, I
it's-
get it. I
yeah.
understand that. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about that, both of you as volunteer chair and or board member, and you, Paul, as staff. How do we take what we learned in this case and apply it as policy?
You know, I think the concept of improving notification, it's a matter of writing language into the permits that we try to consistently place in every single construction permit. One, to save time for the staff who pull that information together for me, and two, to make sure that we're being equitable and fair. So it wouldn't be logical to require new elements of notification and not have that appear in every single noise variance that goes out that's of a construction nature. So I think in terms of what we have before us today, which is a construction noise variance and not a concert or another element of noise-making activity, it's pretty easy for us to standardize that as we have with a number of different conditions for variance types and just uniformly make sure that that's in every single permit. I don't know that there's a particular methodology to enshrine this in code or enshrine this in particular policies and practices of the Noise Review Board and of the Noise Office at this time. That's an interesting question. The board could so decide that they want to put this within their own policies and procedures. So for instance, one of their internal policies and procedures they've decreed is the reason why on many projects, or not the reason why, one of the protections that they have created as board is projects that are over a year long, I can't review. They have to come to the Noise Review Board. So this could potentially be something that the board could put into their policies and procedures and require that in that manner. I'm not sure if that's necessary if we're already going to put it into all of our conditions, but they could go
I'd
down
like
that
to
road.
see something like that, and I'd actually like to see it come back to council for public comment, including your notion of posting at the site. I don't know that that's in code anywhere, right? So that needs to be, we've got a general understanding, thanks to the citizens who brought this forward into your work and such on this particular case. A new council, another different noise officer, perhaps at some point, it needs to be written down. And so I'd like to see that brought back to us in a revised policy for the noise board's operations.
We can certainly do that.
I think that makes sense. Good, thank you. Good suggestion. So this has been very helpful. I'm not sure if there are others here to testify. We'll take a minute, but so with the case before us, you sort of evolved from there. You've got a new variance that is better for the neighborhood than what was being appealed. So I assume that the correct disposition of the appeal is to deny it, since we've moved past that. But have I got that right?
Well, that might be a Ben question insofar as, you could even, I think you could
Are we
approve
approving it or are we denying it?
We're
'Cause
approving it
you-
'cause it's a-
Before we get to the disposition, could we find out if the appellant is here?
Yeah, I
and-
know we're going to conduct a hearing, but what are the options for the council?
The options would be to deny the appeal as moot because there's a new variance. To
Right.
deny the appeal as just on its grounds, depending on the council's consideration, or to approve the appeal with the variance conditions as identified in the newly rewritten variance.
Okay, I'm struggling with the third one because wouldn't that be redundant?
Well, again,
They're
I don't know what
not
the,
working at all on Sundays.
I
under
don't
new
know what the
variance.
appellant's arguments are at
Yeah,
this point
okay.
because the appellant
What-
has not
what-
made their
What's the
presentation.
difference between dismissing as moot because there's a new variance or approving the appeal with the conditions of the variance? What's the legal difference?
Would be the basis of if they were to seek review going forward of the council's determination. And there is a writ of review in the circuit court from here, so would be,
So if the appellant is satisfied with the terms of the new variance, the cleanest thing to do would be dismiss it as moot.
yes, I would agree.
Because there's a new variance which is applicable.
So we'll find out.
So we'll find out.
So,
I just have one final question for staff, and that is, and under the new variance, it says that the hours of the variance construction work shall be from 5 a.m. to 7 p.m., and then it goes on to say about the concrete pours. But then in Part G, it says the use of jackhammers and/or pile drivers shall not be permitted outside the normally allowed construction hours. So that doesn't include not allowing metal saws cutting on metal outside of construction hours.
Because we could write into conditions of a permit 500 different items that might potentially happen on a job site.
Then
If
why
it's-
did you call out jackhammers or pile drivers?
Because we do that on almost every project as a reminder and to make sure that neighbors are clear that, and especially in this case where there's been a high level of sensitivity in the Pearl District around pile driving, that has been a component that 20, 30, 40 neighbors have been vocal about. We could write an additional condition, but at some point this becomes an exercise in trying to second guess which items might be used on a construction site and make noise that
I thought
already.
that the point of C is to say you can have this variance for these early morning concrete pours.
And
What?
that's the only thing that.
Well, it should say that then. It shouldn't say that and then in G say you can't do pile driving.
I'm not sure I see your point insofar as we're reminding them. It's just a way to try and, this item winds up in the hands of citizens, and it's to help them when they read it. Because we've been second-guessed on conditions again and again. It's to help educate people that we are in no way approving pile driving before 7 a.m.
Can
or
you cut
jackhammering.
metal before 7 a.m.?
Not if it exceeds the city noise code. This
It has
is,
to exceed a decibel
yeah.
amount. So whatever they're doing,
So saw cutting in a job site this large, saw cutting metal, may potentially actually be in compliance with the city code if you're a block or two away. So I could not just simply say, here's a citation. If an officer showed up and they're a block away and they wrote us a special report, which is what we're working to do, and said, I'm in my squad car, I hear these operations within my squad car, and forwarded a special report to us, I could use that to estimate a decibel level that's being operated on the site and issue a citation. Whereas jackhammering and pile driving is so bloody loud that there's not an easy way that you could do that in the middle of the night. So we're in a safe position to say, thou shalt not do this outside of the construction hours of the city of Portland. It's more of an educational element to make sure neighbors know we have not issued any leeway with pile driving and jackhammering, because it's one of the items we hear a lot of concern from citizens on.
I think the wording of that condition might be improved to specify that.
I agree with you,
Other
Commissioner.
activities,
I
including
think
but
that-
not limited to jackhammers and pile driving.
Yeah, it can be, the way it's worded is possibly confusing, and I in future variances, will look to change that.
Thank you.
other questions for volunteer or staff?
The only other component we didn't chat about, which I assume someone might have a question on, there was a bigger question for staff and for the city attorney's office on the venue of review. And when we looked at that, within the concept of 2 variances from a staff perspective being reviewed at a council level, that did not seem to make sense to organize the review back to the venue that's actually directing the variance to be reviewed. So in essence, the chair authorizes the noise control officer to review more basic noise variances, and it would be an interesting affair if we're appealing right back to the venue of review to begin with, so to speak. But it could be done. It seems like at this point, with only 2 council appeals in 18 years, that it may not be the time at this moment to do that. So I just wanted to make sure I reported on that component.
Yeah, good, helpful. Other questions? Thank you both. Now we'll see if Mr. Benatia is here and would like to testify, and anyone else? Welcome. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Well, where to begin? The Saw video that you saw last time turned out to not be in violation based on Paul viewing the video. That's what I was told. I've got an email. And he said, it's very difficult to figure it out. Just as in the case of officers citing people for speeding with a calibrated radar detector to measure speed, in the noise office, we rely on calibrated noise measurement equipment bridged with unbiased observations to issue a formal citation based on noise measurements, yada, yada. So it's really difficult because when I got involved in the noise stuff here in our neighborhood, it was first take a log, then it was take photos, then it was get videos, then it's been this carrot that I can't quite catch. I've heard him talk about hanging signs, the company's responsibility to hang signs, and I've heard that mentioned in the summer. It hasn't happened. I believe that the onus should be on the company. If the company is coming into a neighborhood, whether it's a small community, a large community, a lot of construction or a little construction, I think that the construction company ought to have the responsibility to to take care of their place in the neighborhood, and I don't think that's quite set up that way right now. Some of the things that Paul just mentioned, the business cards, there was a variance that got issued last month for this month that was supposed to be for last month. Anderson claims that they walked around, and I mean, they didn't actually say they walked around, they implied that they walked around. It's very weird, but anyway, our neighborhood didn't receive them. I guess before I continue, my wife has drawn a letter, and it's just one page. I'd like to let her read it. So.
Okay.
So this is specifically for you, Mayor Hales. Last time we were here in October, I explained that the city of
I'm
Portland...
sorry, put your name in the record.
Oh, I'm Gwen Seymour. I'm David's partner. Last time we were here in October, I explained to the city of Portland that the city of Portland has an enforcement problem when it comes to noise. Things look fine on paper, in the ordinance and in variances, but in practice, enforcement is broken. 2.5 months later, the situation is the same. ONI has told me that it does not wish to be a punitive agency, and I'm here to report that it succeeds brilliantly in that. Construction companies and developers alike are confident in just how not punitive ONI is. Today, I want to give you just one example of the noise office's reputation for being toothless, a reputation that has damaged livability in many areas around the city and has now reached the North Pearl district where I have lived for the last 7 years. In December 2012, a project across the street from me broke ground, and from the beginning, it violated the noise ordinance regularly. Over the 21 months of the project's major construction activity, I sometimes filed complaints with the city for the project's illegal activity and sometimes tried communicating directly with the construction company. Whatever I did had little effect on the project's illegal behavior, which included regular 5:30 a.m. starts, late evenings, and Sunday noise. In the end, after months of consistent wrongdoing, ONI fined the project just twice. And when the developer contested the fines, ONI removed the larger of the two and reduced the bill to $300. The fee was due in December. The developer has yet to pay. With that kind of slap on the wrist punishment, I suppose I should be grateful that construction companies aren't even more flagrant in their disregard for livability in my community. When just one construction project comes into a neighborhood, building in close proximity to people's homes, it damages livability for months on end. But when there are 6 sites in a 2-block radius and 2 more breaking ground in the next few months, livability is impacted in a whole new way. If you add to that mix city agencies that fail to enforce noise ordinance and special variances, livability no longer exists. My neighborhood will be in that condition through 2017 unless you make changes. You are the councilperson in charge of ONI and the police, the 2 law enforcement agencies that are refusing to place a leash on illegal construction activity. Please fix those agencies and remind developers that it doesn't make sense to destroy the community if they want their own buildings to flourish once they are complete. Thank you.
Thank you.
I like the idea of a review, like a follow-up. I don't think that this problem is solved. I'm glad that I managed to prevent Anderson from taking more hours from the community. However, they are still taking hours from the community. They're taking from the community. This Saturday they did a concrete pour, and they had a variance for that. But the language in the variance doesn't get followed. So for instance, in the variance, it said that they should have no more than 2 concrete trucks on site. They had 5 pumps, which means they had 2 trucks at each pump with 2 trucks in waiting, so at least 10 trucks surrounding the entire block and just going from 5 a.m. And on top of that, just next to our building, there are 2 large sites that they use for staging, which has dirt and equipment on it. And they brought in a huge convoy of dump trucks before 7 a.m., which lined up, queued underneath apartment windows, and started taking dirt away. And all of this was happening at the same time. So there was some variance activity, and then there's this other activity. Now, the community is completely confused. I mean, I've been involved in this and put in way too many hours to figure out how all this stuff is working to actually finally get here before you today. And most neighbors don't know what to do, and they wake up, they go out in their pajamas and their coats. I sent an email, I think maybe some of you might have seen it, and they ask some questions, and they just don't have the time to be able to pursue all of this stuff. And when I go to the noise board, noise office, particularly, and I say, look, this is what happened, they say, hey, we'll monitor it, we'll take your complaint into account, and nothing happens. Nothing has changed at all. Nothing has changed. So I would love to do a review. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think it would be good to revisit this issue.
David, you've raised, and Commissioner Fritz has raised code issues, review issues, and thank you for framing those for us, because there's a bigger fix here. The other piece of what's before us today is the specific appeal and the new variance which has been issued.
Yes.
Are you satisfied with that new variance? Understanding that you would like to have a broader set of issues addressed, and I don't want to lock in on that.
I am, as far as specifically to this appeal, that I requested that it be revised to remove Sundays for work days, and that has been done to that degree. I am satisfied.
Okay, but you've also identified a cluster of issues that need obviously more attention and by the council. So do you have any objection if we were to dismiss the appeal on the basis of the fact that there's a new variance and therefore that's in effect, with your right to come back to us if that's violated?
I would like to do that with the stipulation that I am going to come back to you, and we are going to revisit this. Have that built in if possible, rather than me have to start up any kind of initiative to make it happen. Because to be frank, I feel like, yeah, I got this piece of paper that says something on it, but I'm just counting the days before some kind of large construction happens on that site. And I can't call ONI because they're not working on Sunday and they don't do anything. And I can't call the police because the police don't do anything either. And so that's how I feel. It's a frustrating feeling. So I would really like to accept this variance as it's written here, but with the condition that we meet again to follow up on whether it's effective. Is that fair?
Let's look at some options. Chief's here, Chad and Rachel from my staff are here. We might want to get some combination of them to respond to what we might do next, not just with this appeal, but.
Well, Mayor, rather than keep the record open, which I guess we could continue this, since it appears that you and Commissioner Fritz have an appetite to look at the code issues, it seems to me that if there was a meeting scheduled the next couple of months to begin that conversation, that could also be a meeting to discuss any shortfalls in these projects.
Yeah, I'm sensitive to this question of, how bankable is this new variance? How much can you rely on that? I hear you about that. So one option would be to just simply continue the appeal rather than end it, because it's not a land use case. We're not under some 120-day rule or something. We can continue the appeal and let the work that I described earlier continue, which is to have the police bureau training taking place that's going on, and to have more ears on the street, if you don't mind the bad pun.
Set a date for
and
six
then
weeks for
return to
dismissal.
it. Give you a chance to see how it's working and say how it's working.
Well, if we're all here right now, if I may, I would love to hear from them. I would like to be able to even talk with them, because it would be awesome to it would be wonderful to get a commitment, some sort of a promise, or
let's do that. Let's do that. Let's appreciate you two. Anyone else that wanted to speak on this? And
I actually have a
call them
question.
up.
You noted that the site has not yet been posted. If it were posted, do you think that's an appropriate mechanism of letting neighbors know about the variance?
No.
What would be
I think it's helpful because it at least allows people to go to that specific site. They might be able to see what the rules are for that specific site. But it's been very difficult. I mean, when you looked at this piece of paper, it's like, what does this mean? What does that mean? It's very difficult for people to juggle figuring out this stuff on top of everyday matters and family matters.
So what would you like to see in terms of notification?
I would definitely like to see more enforcement, because I feel like the enforcement would help. As far as notification goes, I think that having the company reaching out directly to citizens would be very helpful. In fact, so there was a building next to us called the Parker, which was recently completed after 2 years, and the developer there, for his, he was having a grand opening party, and for that, he managed to make sure that everybody in our building got a notice that said, we're having a party and it's going to be noisy.
And how did you get that notice? Was it mailed? Was
It was
it posted?
directly mailed. They used a particular organization, which I do know the name of it. I could find that out. But they used a particular type of business that does direct mailings, and so it was that was pretty, I think, effective.
Let me make a counter argument, because I last time when we had this conversation was looking at a more robust notification system. But now that I have a demolition going on next door to my house, I've actually come to appreciate the fact that I know there's one place I can go to check all the notices.
Yeah.
And it's right there.
Yeah.
And if that's not up to date, then there's a real problem.
Right.
Putting aside the porta potty that was knocked over and some of the trees that were cut down without a permit, put all that aside, I know there's one place I can go to get the current documents.
True.
I actually probably might be overly confused if I got 5 or 6 notices for all the things that are going on in my neighborhood and would have trouble matching which and what. There is something, I would just tell you personally, comforting to know that I can go to the construction site and there it is. And that's a big no-no if it isn't there.
Well, what about if you had 6 sites right around you,
That's the
6
thing.
demolitions,
But if
and
I
you
got
had to
6
figure
sites-
out which ones they were, and you had to go to 6 different websites and keep track of 6 different sites?
I'm with you. I mean, I'll go as far, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm
Just
happy
devil's
to do
advocate,
as
you know,
much
we're playing the
notification
game.
as you want, because
Yeah.
I'm all for notification. But I would still, I might, as someone living in that community, start getting confused by getting 6 or 7 letters and have trouble matching it to which site and what's going on.
Yeah.
Having watchdogs in the neighborhood that check each site would give me some comfort, but I'm for more notification.
Well,
Okay, I see.
I don't want to overwhelm people.
Part of that could be that the companies could take feedback from citizens about how to notify better. I actually just sent some to Anderson and to Oni, and Oni thanked me for my comment, and Anderson just didn't reply. I just asked them to, in their email notifications, state the variance number and state when they'd be working outside of time, like right in the subject line, because that's the most important thing, right? What you want to know is when it's outside of normal hours.
And I would also hope that the building manager is being a little more proactive on this. I mean,
In this case, a lot of times the construction companies come before the manager is there and they just tape the stuff onto their door, and the cleaning people take it away because it looks like trash. If the construction companies would come during normal working hours and speak to the managers, that would be real community outreach, actual community outreach.
But that does happen. That does happen sometimes. The construction managers speak to the building managers. For instance, today, someone from Walsh Construction told our building manager that Walsh Construction will be going tonight to the noise board to apply for a variance for February. Now, the building manager told me, oh, we'll put a notice up tomorrow to let the citizens know. Well, that doesn't work. And this is what I mentioned in my presentation last time I was here, is the companies, they seem to know enough ahead of time to be able to organize having 50 or 100 trucks come through the neighborhood filled with concrete and time all that stuff. They can put an $80 million tower up. But when it comes time to notifying the citizens ahead of time, giving citizens enough time to give their feedback, then the logistics become really hard for them.
Yeah.
So for instance, I think with more stuff, if I got, let's say there were 6 sites around me and I got 6 notifications that were really clear, then I could say, oh, this is that site over here, because there's a little map on here, and it shows me the days. And it also tallies that that particular place has, let's say they've got 40 days on their variance, and they've now used 3, and they're going to use 4, 5, and 6 on this weekend. Because it's right now, the way it works is it's up to the company to provide their own oversight, and the city doesn't do that. And so that ends up forcing citizens to have to join in the oversight.
I want you to know that misery loves company. I got a letter recently from a state agency that said, and I quote, "This letter was previously sent to you but returned to us," meaning wrong address. "We are resending it, but the statute has run for you to challenge the determination in the document because you did not respond from such and such date when we issued the ruling."
Right. Well, how about we just don't do variances
I think I
then?
can help you with that. I'm not a lawyer, but I think I can help you with that. So I really appreciate this input, and especially on the notification. These are the kinds of things that I would like to see in administrative rules or policies for the noise board, because clearly if they were going to the noise board tonight, they knew about that ahead of time. So there could be, in other land use cases, there are stipulations about how far in advance you need to notify the neighbors. So these are the kinds of things we'd like to work out with you, because and previously this, in my 20-some years with the council, 6 years on it, and a lot being enabled before. We haven't had this kind of robust discussion of the noise program, and I very much appreciate you bringing this appeal. Clearly, there's a number of committed citizen volunteers and staff who, the small number that they have need reinforcements, for instance, from the police and emergency communications to do the enforcement after hours. So thank you very much for raising all these things.
I'm sorry, I have one last thing about that. Because I think partially because citizens have been active in going to the noise board meetings, David Sweet requested that the Pearl District noise variances go through the noise board, which we very much appreciate because it gives more voice to the process. And so this has also caused, though, a little bit of a bottleneck now, because the particular variance that Walsh wants to do in February, they don't want to wait till the February meeting. They want to do it in this month. And so having, as you mentioned, just one person managing and being the only person that can sign off on these variances for the entire city is really a terrible way to work, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate, thank you. Anything else you want to add? And then I don't know if there's anyone else that wants to speak on this. I'm going to suggest instead, both because we're missing some people that ought to be in this discussion, like Amy Archer, and because we have another time certain, that instead of having them respond now, and I also need the chief to do something else here in a minute,
Okay.
that we instead get you and the police bureau and the noise staff and maybe Mr. Sweet together, even starting outside in the hall after this, but
You can borrow my conference room.
yeah, or in our conference room.
And is that officially recorded?
Well, I'm saying we need to kind of move into a workshop
Yeah.
mode rather than a formal hearing. I want to continue the appeal, because I'd rather leave it on the table here, both to give you some leverage and to give the council a chance to revisit how some of this stuff is working, because the chief's about to start training some officers, and having more than one Paul Van Orden out there, that's going to take a little time, but not that long.
Well, let's just get trained officers, because
Yeah,
one
okay.
more Paul Van Orden might not do anything.
So I'm going to continue the hearing, but give you a chance to have that conversation outside of the formalities of this meeting. I don't know, Mary Ellen, did you want to speak on this?
I just wanted to say, because I got a couple brief comments.
Come on up. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Mary Helen Kincaid, since we didn't know. I'm the one that kind of poked the hornet's nest on this, so I kind of feel a little bit responsible, because there's really responsible citizens, really talented noise office staff, and my experience with DRAC has been that when you get all the convergent people in the room, you get good things to happen, and I just said to Nick in passing, we need to get these people in the room, so I very much appreciate that, and I want to support that, because I think good things can happen, and we've got some things with DRAC as far as notification and demolitions that I think we can use existing process to do. So I think that's a very important piece of this, that directives happens, because once people get, if they don't get the information, they're unhappy. If they get the information, they can still be unhappy, but at least they're informed. So
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we want to get to. So thank you. Appreciate that.
that was all.
Okay, so unless there's anyone else who wants to testify, then I'm going to continue the hearing and ask that we have just that discussion as soon as possible, including today or starting today, and that we'll report back to the council as well as to the folks in the community that are concerned about this. Okay,
Did you want to set a date?
we're going to continue it to, 30 days from now? Sound about right?
14th.
Since we've got stuff in the
Would,
next couple weeks that might occupy our attention.
You think about another hour?
Let's just
That
set
leaves-
a time certain in a Wednesday or Thursday afternoon.
Thursday afternoon on the 19th is available.
Okay, let's take that,
February 19th at 2 p.m.
okay?
Does that work for you, appellant?
Does that work for everybody? Ms. Benetti, does that work for you? Is that okay? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much. All right, let's move to item 76.
Accept report on crowd control and the Portland Police, a policy review conducted by the Crowd Control Work Group of the Citizen Review Committee.
Chief O'Day and others are here to present this report. And I think it's the chief's first official appearance in front of the city council as chief. Welcome.
Thank you. And I think it'd be most appropriate for them to present their report first, and then
Okay.
I'll follow on.
Great, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Derek Reinke, and I am the research analyst with the Auditor's Independent Police Review Division. I'm responsible for the division's database, all of our tracking of trends. Most of the reports that you see come out of our office, I have some kind of hand in those. In addition to basic operating stats that we report quarterly and annually, we also do various policy reviews. You may have seen our recent hip-hop review that our director had a hand in. The Citizen Review Committee also does a number of policy reviews. The 11 volunteers on the CRC listen to community input. They conduct reviews and research. They make policy recommendations in addition to their regular hearing of appeals and general advising of the IPR and the Police Bureau. They form work groups or subcommittees that review areas of public concern. And another part of my role with IPR is to strongly support these research efforts, facilitate and coordinate whatever kind of national research or other things that they might need to do in those roles. So the report that you have in front of you is the end product of the crowd control work group, which was formed in the wake of Occupy Portland, not the more recent events, but this is more of an effort that's been going on for about 2 years, where this work group started off holding a large public forum with a lot of the Occupy Portland folks, and then they started with interviews or meetings with representatives of folks from Portland Cop Watch, from the AMA Coalition, ACLU, and National Lawyers Guild, a few local defense attorneys, one judge here in Portland that heard many of the Occupy cases. They then started talking with some other groups like the OIR group, which is consultants that come in and review the Bureau's officer-involved shootings. They talked with some folks from the city attorney's office, and they asked some questions and had meetings with the Police Bureau's incident command and rapid response teams. They also invested time walking along at protest marches. They were involved in May Day and some other events like that. They walked both within the crowd, and at some other events they shadowed the Bureau's responders, attending some of the Bureau's pre-planning meetings and some of their roll call events and things like that before marches. So I think this is a work product that's been informed by a number of different angles and certainly developed with a lot of volunteer time and effort on their behalf. I also wanted to highlight quickly what this report is not, and I don't do this often, but I think in this case it's kind of important. So this report is not a comment on the Bureau's proposed revisions of the crowd control directive. So there was a little bit of confusion there based on the timing. The Bureau is doing a process now where every month or so they're posting 2, 3, 4 directives at a time up for public comment. And it just happened that the crowd control directive, they'd made some changes to that, and they posted this the month of September up for public comment. The work group that had been going on for about 2 years was very close to an end product, about 90% done, and I think they used that kind of as a motivation or as a window of let's get our stuff done, get it off to the Bureau while they're studying this particular area. So the report itself isn't necessarily a thorough review of any changes that were made to the directive. It's not necessarily a commentary on that, but based on the timing, it was something that they wanted to get in during that month. And to the Bureau's credit, they've held off on making final revisions to that directive until this CRC process wrapped up. And in fact, we've still been meeting. We had a meeting with the chief just this week on Monday where he probed us a little bit more about what was the thinking behind some of these recommendations and how could we take some action on those. So that was great. And also this report is not a comment or investigation of any specific incident. So just in the last few months, for example, we've seen, since the Ferguson and New York City grand jury decisions, we've seen a number of protests and kind of a new series or a new wave of activity in Portland, especially on the Tuesday and Thursday surrounding Thanksgiving. IPR heard from 30 people on that Monday following Thanksgiving, and we are doing an independent investigation into what took place in those protest events. This report is more the end product of a 2-year look into the policies in this area. At this time, let me introduce Rodney Paris, who's the chair of this work group. He's also the outgoing chair of the CRC. He'll discuss some of the group's major findings and recommendations. Rodney is wrapping up a 3-year term on the CRC, so I hope you'll also join me in thanking him for his volunteer service to the city.
Thank you, Derek. So Derek summed up our work pretty well, the process that we went through in working on this. You have the report in front of you. I'm not necessarily going to go through and read all of our recommendations. We did make a number of recommendations. I think you could put them into some logical groupings. The first grouping I would say has to do with equipment. So both around sound trucks and name badges, we made recommendations to beef up the existing capability of the sound trucks. Officer O'Day did say at a more recent protest they had access to a more high-tech device from a manufacturer that they feel did improve their ability to communicate with the crowd. But I have been in other protests and heard a lot of public feedback that at times the equipment that we had at some of those protests was not adequate to reach all members of the crowd, especially in a confusing, chaotic situation like that. With a lot of other noise going on, it sometimes led to miscommunications and misunderstandings about directions from the Bureau. The second one is around name badges. We heard a lot of feedback. One of probably the top things we heard from the community was their desire that all officers involved in Portland monitoring crowd situations have name badges. There have been in the past some jurisdictions that did not want to go along with that. Chief O'Day has done some work on that. I think there's been some agreements from some of those jurisdictions now that will be more standardized going forward, but we believe that's important. The next recommendation 3 was on crowd control training. The Portland Police Bureau has been conducting training for both themselves and other agencies around crowd control. We believe that's important, especially as we bring in other agencies to the city to help us. We want to make sure that those agencies have the same sort of training that our officers do, and that we beef up the training for our own officers around how to handle crowds and deal with those difficult situations. Number 4 is around the use of gear and military-style clothing and tools. Again, this was a common concern that we heard from the public, that the presence of that hard gear equipment can be something that they feel is inappropriate in some situations, that the Bureau feels that it's a good tool. But if you read some of the information from oversight agencies, from other jurisdictions, there is some best practice out there that keeping that out of a crowd control situation until you absolutely need it is a best practice. So the Bureau does do that and has been continuing that practice. We think that is the right approach, and to continue that or increase that, to keep a de-escalation frame of mind until you really need that sort of tool. Again, you see a lot of that along with the Ferguson protests and some of the images you see from those protests of really where the police look more like soldiers. That was really the concern that we heard from the public. Community relations, again, this would probably be beyond just the scope of crowd control. I think the chief's recent appointment of a new command position to deal with community relations is important. I think, but even within the crowd control area, we think it's important. Having police presence at some of these events, making sure they get out into the neighborhood and know the people that are involved in some of these protests. Officers should really have that as part of their job description to help develop trust and confidence in them by the individuals and people that they serve. Again, going through some of these other ones that were, I'd say, more of the ones that we heard the most about. 7, 8, and 9, and 10 have to do with documentation and being transparent, making sure that the permitting process is clear and straightforward, that crowd expectations and information for crowds about how to get permits, what sort of things the police will and won't allow during a protest would be helpful for crowds. Publishing standard operating procedure. I think the Bureau has some concerns that they wouldn't want to release confidential information about tactics, but even having those available so that they could be part of an audit by CRC or IPR even to make sure that they are following their own standard operating procedures, we feel that would be important. And things that can be released publicly about general standards, we think that would help to build that transparency and trust. Number 10 is around the crowd control directive itself. We feel that more should be written into that preamble around de-escalation as an effective tactic to avoid confrontation, and just overall work on that directive, which is currently up for review and has been. And we are thankful that the Bureau held off on finalizing that until we could finalize our process. That was very helpful. 11 is training officers regarding speech, not to target individuals based on political affiliations. We did hear from some members of the public that believe the Bureau unfairly targets people that were supposed anarchists or members of the Black Bloc, another group. We would encourage individualized assessments, not assessments of people based on their membership in a particular political group or organization. 12 is, again, a little bit broader than just the crowd control situation, but we did hear from people that had a difficult time getting their property back after a crowd control incident where they may have been cited or arrested. We've heard about that from citizens in other areas as well, that sometimes those are held far out northwest Portland, and people that may not have access.
Hey, please, let him speak. We'll let you speak, but ma'am, you need to let him speak. You need to let him speak. You'll be asked to leave if we can't let people speak. One more time, everybody gets to have their say, you also, but one at a time. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. So making sure that process is a robust process and fair to people that have that are involved in that situation. So those are our recommendations. As Mr. Ranke said, we did meet with Chief O'Day earlier this week. I think he's amenable to at least looking at most of these. I think there's some concern about a couple of them, but I'll let you speak about that. But again, we thank you for inviting us here to bring this important issue up. It's been an ongoing issue for years. I think we've kind of wrapped up our work, but this will be an ongoing issue. We know the CRC will have an important part to play on that, as one of our main functions is gathering public feedback. So we will continue to do that. We hear complaints, we hear appeals on those complaints. So I know it will continue to be a focus of the CRC.
Thanks for your volunteer service. I know we've got some questions.
Thank you for your work on this report, and thank you for your work on the Citizens Review Committee. I'm curious as to why there's no discussion of the mounted patrol and the use of horses in crowd control.
The use of horses came up a couple of times from people in the public feeling it was overly intimidating. The Bureau's position on that is that they feel that's a useful tool to them. We didn't get too much into use of force, use of batons, use of bikes during protests, pepper spray. We believe that the current use of force policy should apply to crowd situations as they would in any other situation. If there are complaints, that they should be filed. We've seen a numerous number of complaints from some recent protests, and those would go through the normal process. We didn't feel like that should be part of our report at this time, trying to figure out use of force for each and every type of tool that a Bureau may use in a crowd control situation.
So let me just summarize what I think I just heard, that you would view a horse as a potential forceful weapon.
If it's used that way.
It could be, so it's in your minds, it was no different than carrying a gun versus using a gun, riding horse.
It could be used that way. We didn't hear about any particular instances of it being used that way. Most of what we heard about was just people didn't like it being there.
We do have so in IPR we have horse as part of our force database. If we go in as a complaint about force, horse drops down as part of a use of force in terms of how we count and structure things. So absolutely, there's that acknowledgement that can be something that causes injury, that may not be appropriate into a large crowd. I think, and absolutely, the work group heard that from the community over and over. They also went and explored and asked those questions of the incident commanders, of Commander Bob Day, I remember in Central Precinct, and we were saying, what are the concerns around this? What are, from your perspective, are they useful? And what are, we hear these things that are negative about it. Why are you using them? What are the benefits from your perspective? And I think we heard some things as a work group where they felt, we see both sides of this and can't really solve it.
But from a community member's perspective, it wasn't a big enough issue for you to issue any kind of recommendations, or that you felt it wasn't a problem at this point?
We were trying to balance everything, between the feedback we got from members of, I would say, people that are active in protests, other citizens, the Bureau, and just balancing all those inputs. We didn't feel like that rose to the level that we wanted to talk about in our report. There's other things as well that we didn't.
Could you just list some of those other things so that?
I mentioned before some of the specific use of force.
Right.
Bicycles came up, where some protests felt that, the officers would say that they use them for mobility, for getting around crowds, and there have been instances where they have used them as a wall to direct people. I think there have been complaints. Maybe speak more about that, but there have been some feedback we got that officers may have used them to push people, and there's jagged edges on those bikes. But again, we felt that would be a use of force. If there's a use of force complaint, it should fall under the regular use of force.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Other questions? Chief?
Thank you. So last summer, late last summer, I had put out for public comment our revised directive. The directive was put out because we had made substantial changes really over the last 2 years in the way we manage both our crowd events, our protest events. I then became aware that the CRC was finishing up their work on it, so I directed that we hold taking any action other than continuing to get the public input that we had on that till they finished their product. Then I could look at their product, meet with them, and then have a chance of incorporating that feedback into our process. I want to thank the work group for their process, most importantly for having a very informed perspective. Frequently we have thoughts and ideas on how we should do certain things, but without asking why do we do them the way we're doing now. So I really appreciate the process that the group went to, talking to protesters, talking to community, talking to the police. That gives me a very valuable document to work from. Briefly, there's two major historical periods in the Police Bureau where we've made changes around how we manage crowds. The first was back in 2003, 2004, when Commander Sizer was there, and ultimately she really refined our process in reflecting, one of our major roles is to support free speech rather than try to control an event. And our next most major revision in our process has really been the last 2 years. We've been really active in formalizing specially trained crowd control incident commanders who are very up to speed on the capabilities of bicycle squads, of the rapid response team, of mobile field forces. And so with those changes brought the way we were doing business was not reflective of our 09 directive. So we put out that revised directive to better reflect what we were doing. And I can briefly go through the recommendations if you'll find that helpful, or take any questions on any of them in particular, whichever you'd find best.
Wouldn't hurt to briefly go through those.
Okay. The first recommendation they have on the sound trucks, we agree with. That's one that's been a challenge for us. The equipment that we have for making those notifications is not the highest quality. During the recent protest around Ferguson events, we had for several weeks the loan of a very new modern high piece of acoustical equipment that head and shoulders above this technology and completely addresses the concerns that they talk about in here as far as the quality of language. Also, one of our revisions has been to always have a PPB member giving those notifications, and it's actually always a PPB supervisor, sergeant, because of the authority that they have. The number two, the name badges, that is something that Captain Elmore, who's in charge of our rapid response team, has accomplished. He's got an agreement from all of our partner teams that support us in events that they will wear name tags, and they have done so since that agreement has been in place. Number three, the uniform crowd control training, the same. We have formalized spring and fall training. The other departments are invited and attend that training with us. If a department's team can't attend, they'll always send a supervisor so they stay current on the practices that we're doing and the expectations that we need. Number four, around use of the rapid response team and their protective safety gear, and this applies a little bit to the mounted patrol unit, to your inquiry. Our crowd control incident commanders are very well trained in knowing that even showing the rapid response team in their protective safety gear, which we need for many different events, not all of them, but for many different events, they're a part of the planning. We know that even showing them, so we keep them out of sight unless we need them. And same with the horses. They're generally out of sight unless we need them for a particular event as it has developed. Recently, we had an occasion where we were caught a little bit short of resources in anticipating what we need for these different events. It's a little bit guesswork, a little bit science, a little bit history based on what information you have. So recently up at we had an event that was a two-part march. It ended up at the Moda Center, and when it was looked like folks wanted to get in the doors, the only resources that we still had at that point were the rapid response team. So that's the one time that's happened where we've deployed them where we wouldn't have intentionally deployed them had we had the adequate number of resources that we want. But know that that's a part of the crowd control incident commanders' intent, and they know, just showing them, let alone deploying, what that effect can have. But they're a component that we need. At these different events, even recently, where we've taken rocks and bottles and had to reclaim highways. So they're a part of our needed resources. Number 5.
What kinds of incidents would require a police in protective gear?
The most recent example would be where a group of folks took control over the highway and started throwing rocks and bottles at the officers. And so that's not something you're going to want to have a regular officer in a uniform going. You need to have your protective helmet, your face mask, your safety gear for when that's happening.
And do you generally wait until it appears that people are going to be throwing stuff?
It completely depends on the nature of the event. It may be that there's an opportunity, if that is what you're believing is going to happen, merely having the rapid response team roll by or deploy, and that can prevent that action from happening when they see that group of folks ready to prevent that from happening.
Doesn't that go counter to what you just said, though, of that just by them showing up, that can escalate things?
Well, you would not want to do is just have your rapid response team, here's your people just managing any kind of crowd event. If you're, it may be that, just showing them can have that effect, but it may be that, an event has already gotten so bad you need to have them come in because of the things that you're taking. But there's very much, because it's mentioned here that just showing them can have effects. It can also have an effect of, oh, wait a second, there's the proper people here that are not going to let us do that as well. The frontline officer training about kind of keeping their cool. There's language in that draft from last summer that reflects that as well, and that's also part of all the incident commanders' briefing. The permitting process, the Bureau doesn't really have a role in the permitting process. We have heard that maybe there's a way it could be more friendly, but also on the Police Bureau side, the fact if somebody has a permit or not doesn't automatically indicate to us there's going to be problems here. It just means it's going to be maybe harder for us to manage because we don't know the route. If folks aren't telling us, we don't know, the duration, that type of stuff.
So, Mayor, is there any thought of having the police be more involved in the permitting process?
Not as yet. Again, once the permit is acquired by a group, the Police Bureau is given a copy and informed that this event's going to take place, so they can plan for it, right?
Yeah, if an event holder is going to get a permit, we then become a part of that process.
Mm-hmm. It's really up to the organizer.
Right.
Could I just make a comment on that? The feedback that we got was that the permitting process can be extremely cumbersome and lengthy for people that are involved in in organizations that they would want to get a permit. So we don't want to discourage that. I think a permit can help the Bureau plan ahead of time and reduce the chance for conflict. So I think anything we can do to make that easier for citizens to get a permit should be explored. There are always going to be groups that don't want to get a permit. That's not part of their mission. They feel that's overly intrusive. But where it does work, I think that can be streamlined.
Well, particularly where we might need crowd control and one route might be better than another, it would be both streamlining and encouraging more collaboration, and not just in protests, but including protests such as the Naked Bike Ride, where it would be helpful to know ahead of time where folks were going to be going.
Yeah.
No, thank you for the help. 8 and 9, those were actually 2 points that I was looking forward to more conversation with the group and got some good ideas out of. We even try to be, at times as best we can, careful about even the words our PIO puts out instead of, traffic will be disruptive. Maybe traffic may be rerouted so that, not necessarily saying this free speech event, is going to disrupt or using language that is maybe more inclusive around supporting free speech. One of the publishing our procedures, there's very little. There'll be a small amount of specific tactics that we wouldn't want to discuss, but our directive is pretty robust. That goes out for the public comment piece. And then that'll be online. Training Advisory Council has full access to all of our lesson plans as well. But a piece of information through our discussion earlier this week that I found real helpful is maybe just putting together almost like a frequently asked questions website that generally we could spell out, in general what our expectations would be. So it'd be things like, Generally, bridges are going to be off limits. Generally, access to the highways is not going to be tolerated. Disrupting, major transportation infrastructure is not, and just kind of breaking down those pieces. So that was a helpful conversation that I really appreciated earlier this week.
And I want to just elaborate on that because I had some questions after one of the recent events, not protests, but events, which again, I think you're right, that reframing it, and it's not disruption, it's a rerouting. It's part of what we do here in Portland. I think that's very important. So I got some feedback because you mentioned that bridges are off limits, and I said, why? And the answer is that some bridges people tend to climb when there's an event, and that's not safe. So it's then better to block off access to the climbable bridges. The bridges that have access to the freeway, obviously pedestrians on freeways is highly dangerous, and so that's another reason. So I hadn't connected those dots, and I think that explaining to citizens that we're not just arbitrarily making up rules, but this is why,
Exactly.
I think that would be really helpful.
Number 10 on kind of revising the crowd control preamble, talking about discretion. That is, let's talk about, well, these are not, we're specifically, directing officers, no individual action. So that is a part spelled out in our revised directive, as well as reiterated when the incident commander does their intent during their original briefing. Part of our revised preamble piece in the directive from last summer also reiterates right up front on our policy piece that one of the most important roles that the police have is to support free speech events as well. Number 11, talking about training officers to not target individuals, continuing training and discussing officers that's ongoing. That's in discussion and briefings. There's people, we don't target specific people. We target behaviors or known histories of folks. So I've been a part of free speech and protest events since 2003 and have seen some of the same people at every single event, regardless of the cause. We know that there's some people that, they have a history of, their role is to disrupt, cause damage, or hijack events. And so there's people like that we know. So what we will tend to do is focus officers around that, people with known specific histories like that. We have a finite amount of resources and a presence around people who have a known history of trying to hijack events or cause damage that can help prevent that. But we don't target individuals based on the message in their speech. We don't target individuals based on their affiliation.
Chief, could you just discuss the practice of so-called kettling, of having police surround particular folks and arrest everybody in an area? Why would you do that?
I've only recently heard that term. One of the crowd control techniques that the Bureau does have, if we have not been able to disperse people after repeated opportunities, the crowd control incident commander may make a decision. All right, we're going to arrest this group. We have given them, by the time we would do that, they've been given numerous warnings to cease what they were doing.
And how is that decision made?
It's based on the incident commander. They've got a lot of different options to them to include selective arrest, larger group arrest, but based on the totality of what they had, how much violence has gone on, what kind of property damage has happened, how many people have been hurt. But they'll look at the totality of that and of their many options, make a decision. Is that the best decision that they want to do? Many of these events will continue on, and when they get to the point of either causing damage or too much disruption, will continue until it stops being fun.
Yes. At what point does the commissioner in charge, the mayor, get pulled into that policy decision of this has gone on too long?
The mayor is generally not going to be a part of an individual particular event. It will be in conversations with me around policy, around what is our practice, what is his expectations around these events. But it would not be fair to him to call him in the middle of an event and say, what do you want us to do? I mean, his direction and his influence and conversation and expectation needs to be well prior to game day.
Well, except that during the Occupy, the whole council was involved in how long is this going to go on with this particular demonstration, how's this going to be managed. When Mayor Adams was in Asia on a business trip, I was the president of the council, and I was involved on a day-to-day basis of, we're expecting this, what is your expectation? So I think, particularly when some of these are political free speech.
Yeah, I've been present for some of these events, and I do believe that it's my job to give general direction, but not moment-to-moment management. I think having incident commanders who have directives that are written down and in the light of day and in public, which is what we're doing, and then have the discretion to make good decisions and consequences for making bad ones on the scene works. For example, in one of the recent protests, I watched the incident commander say, you know, this particular group, based on the way they're operating, I think we should just let them go into the mall and have their protest inside the mall. And no police officer followed several hundred people into Pioneer Place. They chanted, held a moment of silence, and left the building. I appreciate that incident commander having the discretion to make that judgment call, and he made the right call, in my opinion, in that instance. And so therefore, for me to substitute my judgment moment for moment, you know, in a situation like that would be pretty absurd. But for me to lay down some expectations about the relationship between the police bureau and that particular free speech event is completely appropriate.
So if the incident commander decides that he or she wants to stop or disperse a crowd because of whatever reason, they're not causing a problem, they may just be sitting in an intersection, for example. The incident commander makes that decision, you would then stand by that decision regardless of if that then precipitated adverse outcomes?
Well, I think that's pretty hypothetical.
Yeah, and know that for our incident commanders, they truly are very specifically chosen and trained people, knowing that one of their most responsibilities is supporting free speech and balancing that most difficult event. Every one of those events is critiqued afterward, and it's critiqued again quarterly with all the other incident commanders so that we learn from each of these events.
I think the other piece of it is important is the accountability loop. So we haven't, for a long, long time, I've been with IPR just over 8 years now, I haven't heard of an actual case of kettling that was so documented as this last,
Yeah, there was this.
as this last 2 months ago, or this flashbang grenade that was used down by Pioneer Place. So we're doing investigations of those, and those were an obvious decision by an incident commander that needs to be reviewed for appropriateness. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how we should review after the fact.
And I would just say when we spoke with people with the Bureau about kettling, they told us that they do not use that tactic.
Although the term often is, I mean, the way it was presented to us was to kettle up and spray with a pepper spray or something like that. And we were told, yeah, to definitively, we don't do that. That's not trained. We absolutely wouldn't. But again, I was like, well, do you have some SOPs that tell me that or some of that? And that's where some of this info, having more of an info flow, I think would be helpful.
Well, I expect we will get some testimony on this. When things happen in parks and there's an incident, my rangers are telling their supervisors, and then the Bureau Director is in contact with me. And if there's a policy question, then I help make that.
There's a policy question, yes.
No, it's a policy as in operations. So I want to make sure that as part of this discussion, we look at the appropriate connection of the mayor and the council in managing incendiary situations.
I know it might be appealing for some people, for the police commissioner, namely me, to have more sway moment by moment over the operation of the police bureau in a situation like that. But I think in a democracy, we might want to be careful about that, in that would cut both ways. Some mayor might say, don't arrest those people. Maybe I would be more inclined to say that. And some mayor might be more inclined to say, go arrest those people. I don't think you want political officials, mayors included, making moment-to-moment decisions involving who gets arrested.
Not
So I'm not
necessarily
sure if
which
that's what you were
particular people
saying.
get arrested. However, I do see a role for the commissioner to be involved in, for instance, a decision about this has gone on too long, let's break it up. If it's
Right.
just a matter of it's
Right.
gone on too long,
Right.
rather than it's causing problems.
Right, I hear you.
And then the last one, number 12, insuring properties released back. That was one that was a surprise to me on that. I'm, you know, how we handle property is very strictly regulated. The state is very clear on, you know, the requirements for when you take something from somebody, you give them a property receipt. I think part of it might be based around convenience and maybe part of it around changes at the jail on what property they will allow an inmate to take in. So I think maybe stuff that historically had been able to be with somebody who's put into custody now ends up in the property room and it's not convenient in its location. So after our meeting earlier in the week and going through this feedback, I'll incorporate that feedback into the revised directive along with some other input that we got and put that back for the work group to take a look at.
Okay. Other questions for the chief or our work group member or IPR staff?
Just wanted to go back to the beginning when we should the soundtracks. I hear that we've got the better equipment.
No, we don't.
We
have-
borrowed, we had one on loan for a period of several weeks, and it was just a night and day difference on the clarity of communication, and it addresses all the things the work group accurately brought up.
So you'll either be
Alone.
prioritizing that or using it, or using your existing
Yeah, we've,
materials and
now that
services
there
budget
is
to do that.
good technology out there to work, that's something we've got to look at.
Thank you for the clarification. My question was also, have we done the training for the staff who are making the announcements in the proper way to make those announcements?
Yes, they have now specific sheets, if you will, a script to follow so that we meet all of the requirements for different dispersals or movement as.
And have those been discussed with the CRC or other citizens to see if they think that they're clear?
I don't know if part of CRC's group, if they had that at the time, I don't
We didn't see
think so.
That might be something to consider.
Thank you.
Available? Okay, good idea. Other questions or suggestions? Thank you all. Now, I know we have a number of people signed up to testify, and we're going to hear everybody. We have one logistical bobble here, and that is in about 15 minutes, we're going to need to recess for 15 minutes because Commissioner Novick and I have a conference call that we have to participate in. So we will take the first few folks, and then we'll recess at approximately 20 till, and then come back. So our apologies for that interruption, but stuff happens. So we'll take the first three, please.
Okay, first three, please, coming up are Dan Handelman, Regina Hammond, and Joe Walsh.
Good afternoon.
Good
Welcome.
afternoon, Mayor Hales and Commissioners. I was hoping to ask for 6 minutes. I know you have a time constraint now, but since we attended all these meetings, I'm hoping.
Go ahead. Again, we'll be able to take the first three of you, I think, and
Okay.
then we'll probably have to take that break. So
Thank you very much. I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch, and, I meant to hand in our testimony. We are extremely concerned that, that after hearing from demonstrators, lawyers, members of the public, and from us about the use of weapons at protests, including batons, pepper spray, horses, and bicycles, the crowd control report does not even mention these items. CRC had promised to at least mention the weapons in other concerns raised during our process section. While many of the recommendations they make are on point and productive, it is the use of violence that most concerns our group, and many people have witnessed or been subjected to that violence over the many years we've been active. We'd also hope that tasers will be addressed because they are allowed by the current and proposed revised policies, and they should not be. We raised the issue of weapons before the committee as a whole adopted the report. They did not remedy this problem, even though the vote came just days after the PPB deployed flashbang devices at a crowd, later kettling people for arrest, which is not theoretical, it was real. Also, it has come to our attention that when analyzing force data, the Bureau and IPR may be considering all force used at one protest action as one use of force incident, which would be highly misleading. If one person is hit with a baton and another is pepper sprayed in the mouth and another is hit by a bicycle, these are three distinct uses of force. Our purpose in these suggestions is to alleviate a practice which has harmed members of our own group and others in the community. Members of our group have been kettled and pepper sprayed, pushed up against a wall by a police force, hit with police bicycles, and suffered and witnessed other abuses at protests. We have no interest in perpetuating police use of violence against unarmed, peaceful protesters. We oppose the use of the current way of array of weapons, but we're not going to advise on ways to harm people. That's not our task as a group promoting police accountability. So about specific recommendations, the one about name badges, we asked CRC to recommend that the Bureau and the city work on a state statute requiring all law enforcement to display name tags on their outermost garments. Did not make it to the final report, and we understand you finalized your legislative agenda last week, but we hope this can be added to the slate. And we have other ideas too, which are not related to crowd control. With a recommendation about training people from outside agencies, we hope that it will be mandatory for any officer who comes into the city to do crowd control to take Portland police training. Otherwise, the response to the crowds will not be consistent, and it will put the community at risk of harm and both the city and other agencies at risk of legal action. About militaristic uniforms and equipment, we support the recommendation to minimize the presence of militaristic uniforms and weapons, but the phrase "unless absolutely necessary" is too vague and should be better defined. There is such a thing as too much discretion, and I think that phrase exemplifies it. On the community relations recommendation, we appreciate the CRC added a sentence that says the PPB should be aware that not all community members and/or groups are open to police contact. We noted that there will always be members of the community who do not wish to interact with the police because of their militarism, violence, racially imbalanced enforcement, and other injustices. While there's nothing wrong with recommending more contact, it should not be seen as a means to resolve problems in crowd situations per se. Furthermore, we've received and heard of other people receiving unsolicited contact from the Bureau ahead of protest actions, which doesn't feel community-oriented, but comes off as kind of an invasive way to collect information on political organizations. Organizers who had the PPB post their Facebook page event were very troubled by that approach, for instance. On the permitting process, we agree the permitting process is cumbersome and should be centralized, but we support the organizing of protests without permits, as permits are not always required. And some would argue that they are undue burdens on free speech. We believe strongly the First Amendment event should not have to be cleared through the police. So, I respectfully disagree with the suggestion to increase the amount of police involvement in that process. They have plenty of say right now. On process issues, the chief mentioned, and this is the first time that I heard the story about how they came to be hearing the crowd control directive in September when CRC has been working on this for 2 years. So it may just be a case of left hand and right hand not knowing what each other is doing, but Captain Famous, who's the head of professional standards, attends every CRC meeting, and certainly he knew they were reviewing this directive, and I think it was very strange that the Bureau put this out while CRC was still working on their recommendations. I'm glad that the chief is waiting to hear the CRC's recommendations. I hope he listens to the rest of the community today too before making any changes to that policy. In the section about workgroup activities, the CRC noted that the force complaints are sustained less often than other allegations, but there's no analysis of why that should be so. And I think that they're trying not to draw conclusions, but I think when we reviewed the IPR's annual report, we noted there's less than 1% of all force allegations have been sustained over the entire course of IPR's existence. I also wanted you to know that I brought an article that was written by the police chief from Nashville, Tennessee. I don't know if you read about what happened there after the Ferguson grand jury decision, but the chief there let the citizens who were protesting get out on the freeway, told the people who were upset by it, well, it could be a traffic accident up ahead. You have to wait in traffic from time to time. He gave them the hot chocolate. And then somebody wrote in and complained about this, and he wrote back a very compelling letter, which I'll also enter the record for you. And finally, I want to point out, there's always discussion about violence at protests, and most of the time that violence is coming from the police. And nothing, to me, illustrates that better than the case of the Oakland undercover officers who were banging on windows and dressed in masks, and then they were unmasked by the protesters and drew their guns on them. I hope you all saw that in the media. So bear in mind, it's often when you hear about a violent protest, the violence is being perpetrated by the police.
Thanks, Dan. One clarification and a question. One, either I didn't say it very well or people misunderstood me. I didn't say kettling was theoretical. I know that was done at one of those Thanksgiving week protests. My thought about what was theoretical would be for me to be personally managing the question of when that happens. So that to me seems awkward at best. Secondly, you talked about the the unless absolutely necessary standard, what would you recommend?
Again, we said we're not going to try to impose we'd rather not see these hard shells and weapons come out at all.
Ever?
Well, I think that Chief O'Day made the point that he thinks there's some people who get intimidated by it and then they don't do something bad. But there are other people who get intimidated by it and say, I'm never going to a protest ever again. There's military police there with these giant weapons. I don't feel like my kids are safe. I'm not going to come anymore. So you have to understand that the presence of those officers is very, it sends a very bad message.
I do understand that. But
so I think
what's the standard for when that gear gets used?
I think that's something that the community and the police bureau should talk together about and make it more specific than absolutely necessary, because what they think is necessary is different from what other people might think is necessary.
All right, well, I'm interested in hearing suggestions for what that standard should be, because I share the sensitivity that as soon as that gear goes on, it changes the perception of the police, if not the willingness of people to participate in protest. I get that, but there has to be a line at which reasonable people would say, okay, I guess they have to use that gear now. I want to hear what people think that line is. This is an attempt at drawing that line. Granted, it involves a lot of judgment in interpretation possibilities and what those words say, but I'm interested in what words you'd like better. And I'm going to take one question and maybe your testimony, and then we have to break. I'm sorry.
Mayor, I was actually just going to suggest that, sometimes you can save a lot of argument interpreting either law or policy by giving some examples.
Yeah.
So it may be that you can't do much better in terms of an overall arching statement than absolutely necessary, but if you add a couple of examples people would agree would be appropriate, it would help.
Yeah, okay, good suggestion. Welcome.
Yes, Mayor Hales, Commissioner. My name is Regina Hannon, and I'm a member of Portland Cop Watch. And I sat in on the crowd control work group meeting starting in June 2012, and as part of the public provided input. When the work group report finally came out in September of 2014, I was absolutely dismayed to read there was nothing whatsoever in the report dealing with the weapons. And I want to stress they are weapons and not tools, as is so frequently said, that the police use against people exercising their rights of speech and assembly. And to me, that was the whole main crux of the issue of crowd control. I felt that my input was helpful in that I have personally experienced the use of some of these weapons. I have been pushed by a baton. I was pushed and intimidated by a very large horse. And some while back, I was kettled and was pushed into a wall with a group of other people, and the police then brought out the pepper spray and indiscriminately sprayed the group. I brought this up many times and was always told, well, they don't do that now. But I guess that happened recently. I have also been subjected to conflicting instructions that the officers give to the crowd about where to go and where to move and where to stand. I think that the use of horses in crowd control is unconscionable and inhumane, both for the humans and the horses. The horses need to be put out to pasture. And it was very disheartening to recently learn that the police are now resorting to the use of flashbangs in crowd control. And the report also referenced that hard gear, and we've talked about this, can raise tensions and confrontations. And I realized this so much because I happened to be present when at Chapman and Lonsdale were supposedly cleared of people from Occupy. And I stood and watched as up the street marched many officers, and they were all arrayed in their hard gear and their weapons, and then following them was the mounted patrol, a number of huge horses. And all of this in order to face a group of unarmed folks. Had it not been so outrageously inappropriate, it might have been amusing in that such a display might bring to mind the battles of Hastings and Waterloo. And we request, as per our email recently to you and the report we're submitting, that you not sign off on the report without addressing the police use of weapons and the other issues we have identified. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions?
Can I just clarify something? This is the auditor's report. We'll be asked to accept it. If we're asked to accept it, it isn't that we are necessarily agreeing with it or disagreeing with it. It's just being transmitted. Are you suggesting that we should not even accept it?
I am at this point, unless some of the issues that we are raising are addressed. And I think the use of weapons, which is not in the report at all, that should be addressed, because that's the important aspect of crowd control.
Thank you. Again, I'm sorry that we have to do this, but I want to recess the council till 4 o'clock. I know, Mr. Walsh, sorry, but we have an appointment here that we can't miss. So we'll be back at 4. Thank you very much. Walsh, you are on deck, so please come on up.
Do you want to call the next three?
Yes.
And we'll take Joe Walsh, Michelle Munt, and Charles Johnson.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Walsh. I represent Individuals for Justice. We would like to fully support everything that Copwatch said. We would also like to appreciate publicly the questions of Commissioner Fritz. We believe that there should be no police officers at all at a demonstration, none. So we take a very puristic line on this issue. It seems to me that if we started with that concept and then moved and said, well, okay, we have to have security, we have to do this. If we started with the concept that these people are exercising their fundamental right to protest, and we should not interfere with it at all. No permits, no nothing. When you start with that concept and then you move into, okay, these guys over here are getting a little bit out of hand, so maybe we need some police over there. There's another concept that you should consider, and that's between getting a permit and not getting a permit, there should be something else, okay? In my 40 years, and I think I said this before, I never asked for a permit. I will protest, and if you don't like it, arrest me. That's my attitude. If I do something wrong, arrest me. Or if I choose to get arrested, knowing that if I do something to be the catalyst of that, then arrest me. That's part of the protest. Being a pain in the neck is part of the protest. It's not a parade. So you got that problem. You got to think about that part of it. You should never have rifles at a protest. Never. You should never have bicycle cops beating people with their bicycles. Never. You asked for some suggestions, and I'm giving them to you. You should never have military-type weapons, whether it's bombs, or it's grenades, or it's tanks. If you do that, you are the catalyst for the violence. I've gone to thousands of protests over the last 40 years. I have never violently attacked a police officer. Never. Under any circumstances. And sometimes I wanted to, but I didn't. 99% of the people that you have at the protest are nonviolent. And you have to believe that, and you have to trust it. You ask us to trust the police. You ask us to trust you. You have to learn to trust us. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Michelle Munn. Hi, Councilors and Mayor. What I witnessed about these events that you've discussed, Sergeant O'Day especially, is very far from what he's describing. And just one other thing, you kind of were saying they shouldn't do this or they should wait for that. And thanks, Amanda, for saying when they want to go home, that's when they break up our protests. It's not about what's happening. They just don't want to have a shift change during the middle of it. I think I might have forgotten my second thing, but they use us to train their militarization on. And that's not being said. And one example of training, besides the protest training on us, practicing their weapons, seeing how it works, letting the corporations make money from selling the weapons and stocking them up everywhere, wherever they hide all their weapons. Besides that, they train people on the spot with no formal training. The Portland police train people out in the park by injuring my friends and bringing on the young new cadets and showing them how to injure them. And that's what you're not acknowledging. They train to injure between each other outside of the training system. It relates with crowd control because they use it again, making permanent injuries on people's arms, especially hands, stompings, and special moves to injure people forever.
Michelle, we have some new guidelines about training.
Guidelines won't work. That's enough out of me.
I hope you take a look at them.
No, the guidelines won't work because the culture, shouldn't be a dialogue. I'm just saying one-sided thing. They are not honest in any way to tell you what's going on. And it's okay, we're still talking, so let's just keep talking about everything.
Ms. Monk, could you just, earlier you were going to give us some comments about belongings. Could you tell me your
I
experience?
already said, we've been ripped off of our cell phones, computers, many items, anything they want. Jewelry, I've lost necklaces in the jail after a protest. They
And is that-
steal, they steal.
Is that the jail staff?
It's a repeated thing amongst numerous of my informants. I go to all the bum feeds, what you could call it, the soup line, whatever you want to call it. I hear it every week. That's why I say every day. And I've compared my notes with other people about the hospital injuries, and other people they give me more incidents, and it is every day. Because there's enough hospitals that's injuries by the police every day.
For the
I'm
belongings?
kind of counting the jail staff as police, sometimes.
For the belongings, is it that there's
They're
no
ripping
record?
us off. They're thieves.
There's no record of them, or they're too difficult to get back, or
No,
what?
just read the literature. Listen to the radio. Police are thieves.
Thank
I had a person tell me on the bus one day, a young black man, very capable. He said, he wasn't even joking with me. He said, I want to grow up to be a policeman so that I can steal other people's stuff. That's what he told me. He wasn't even joking.
Thank you.
That's what they're training each other to do, too. I have more incidents. This isn't the beginning.
Charles, welcome. Thanks, Michelle. For the record, again, my name is Charles Johnson, and it came up earlier about what is the actual procedure that we're dealing here with accepting the report. And I would encourage you to consider not accepting it in order to establish a good baseline for further specificity, because it doesn't talk about injuries that people have experienced from bicycles and doesn't address the equestrian policing, to which the best solution is simply to disband the equestrian police. It doesn't, I think, give broad enough look into the fact that individuals suffered from excessive crowd control. And there's probably still pending litigation going back then, and I know that policies have been revised. And rather than detailing, we all know that the city attorney successfully showed the world that it's okay to shove spray pepper spray down the throats of college-age women, and found some jurors that would uphold that. So Portland's probably not as great as we think it is. But under the new guidelines, after Thanksgiving with the Mike Brown, the failure of the grand jury to return a true bill in Ferguson, we've had a flashbang deployed in downtown Portland, and I think that you all are on the ball enough that we're going to try and have higher standards for that so it doesn't happen again unless there's more imminent threat of danger or something. Senator Ron Wyden left his house in Southeast to go to the Southeast campus of PCC, and protesters following the tradition of Dr. Martin Luther King felt that they needed to be in the street, and a member of Veterans for Peace and a mom from Salem were targeted by the police. I was in the basement of the jail to greet them when they were released. And just recently, this will connect with the fact that on the 5th or the 6th, the district attorney's office or the judge decided, oh, those people in Szymanski, we've been giving them the bureaucratic runaround so long, we can't provide these people with fair trials. Never mind the legal shenanigans we've been pulling for 3 years. So I think that way too much of the city and the county's, the DA's office resources is being wasted because the police are escalating. So I hope that this conversation we had earlier about the mayoral discretion or the police commissioner discretion about getting involved, that you will look and say, it's not a good use of police man hours to be arresting people at protests that have not caused injury, period. And also to have some conversations about good use of public resources in cooperation with Mr. Underhill about wasted time at the DA's office, that victims of sex trafficking and victims of violence aren't getting their cases due attention because you're doing these public policy things against people doing constitutional expression. So I hope that your office will look at both not having these arrests and hard gear staff deployments as much as you've worked on, but also you don't need to send police officers to testify, to prosecute people who were part of traffic control for a civil rights march down 82nd Avenue. Those people do have counsel, but I really think that the best use of public policy is to tell the police department that it's not a priority for those people to participate in those prosecutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next.
Next three are Robert West, Trudy Cooper, and Teresa Rayford.
Afternoon. I think you're first, Mr. West.
All right. Well, I wanted to bring up the fact that.
Just put your name in the record.
Okay, my name is Robert West.
Thanks.
And I want to bring up, first of all, that I was there when they flashbanged. In fact, I was, three of them went off really close to me. And later on, I was involved in that kettle where they arrested 10 people. I was one. There was 2 people that were with Film the Police and one other media person that was arrested. And they had us in the East Precinct holding cells for over 2 hours, in which I had to be taken out by ambulance. And the hospital said that I was dehydrated. They have water and stuff there that just when you're handcuffed behind your back, you can't drink it. The officers decided that we were such a threat that they couldn't take the handcuffs off of us. How they came up with that, I have no idea. I'm 48 years old and I got arthritis in my back, and for some reason the police felt unsafe about me being out filming stuff, so they hit me with flashbang grenades. And they felt unsafe about me being in East Precinct, so they wouldn't take off the handcuffs. And to me, for the chief to come in and say that, you know, what he said, we're still missing a Film the Police riot shield that we know the police recovered. There was people that said the police recovered it, but the property room doesn't have it, Central Precinct doesn't have it, East Precinct doesn't have it, and officers that I know that was there that I talked to said they would try to find it, and they can't find it. You know, and the riot shield only stands from the floor about this tall and about that wide. So it's not something that you just put in a corner. And like I said, I was injured when they took me over to East Precinct. You know, they made sure that when I sat there and said that I want to take my Fifth Amendment rights and not say anything, they made sure that I wasn't going to be dealt nicely. In fact, when I first sat there and said I need medical assistance, they sat there and said I took my Fifth Amendment rights. They can't talk to me. And then about 5 minutes later, I go, hey, I need medical attention. And finally, an officer came up and goes, what's wrong? And when they took my blood pressure, it was, what was that, 150 over 120. And the fire medic or fire paramedic or EMT or whatever that took the blood pressure said he needs to go to the hospital now. And the officer tried to argue, saying, well, we're releasing them right now. We can walk them right out the lobby and they can take them from the lobby. And I said, no, I want to be taken from right here. You know, I was feeling dizzy and you know, I wanted to make sure there was reports done. I'm sure that wasn't reported to you guys. I'm sure there was no injury reports put down on that. And I've asked the police department for copies of the police report, and they're dragging their feet.
Well, thanks for coming today. Appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Do you have the records from the hospital from when you were seen? Were you taken to the emergency room?
Yes, I was.
And do you have those records by any chance?
Yes, they're at the house.
I'd be, if you'd be willing to, I'm trying to think of how I can get them so that they're still confidential.
Independent police review.
Let me think about that, because Mayor, I would be very interested to know if there was documentation at the police, you know, if this, thank goodness you were fine and that you're here to talk to us. If there had been an incident, well, how would we have looked at that? So thank you for coming to talk to us about that.
Thank you. Ms. Cooper, I think you're next, so.
Hi,
Welcome.
I'm Trudy. Hello, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm from the Elliott neighborhood in Northeast, and I feel very supportive of the report and the work group as far as it goes. I'd like to talk a little bit about how basically I agree with the people who have said that if you don't approve it today because it needs more refinement, that's what I would like to support. But there's two things in particular that that I wanted to focus on and the assumptions behind them, and that's the issue, the recommendation of the hard gear and the recommendation about being publicizing more about approach and in particular constitutional rights. And I'd like to talk about the assumptions behind that and the relation between the two. First, I've been a protester for a very long time. I've been attending protests, if not organizing them. And it wasn't until 2011 that I saw the kinds of things that we're talking about today with the hard gear, with rifles being visible, with the kind of response. And, for example, I went to almost every Jobs with Justice rally and march that existed. And at that time, Rosie Sizer was on horseback and she knew all of us by name, or many of us by name. It was a whole different feeling. And I don't know if all of that stuff was there at that time and I just didn't know it, or if it was in the background, out of sight, like the work group has said, which would be good. Maybe it was there the whole time. But what I really wonder is, when did that happen and what are the assumptions behind it? Because as much as I support the issue of keeping it out of sight, definitely keep it out of sight, because it bothers protesters, as they said in the analysis, but what bothers me most is the assumptions about having it in the first place. Because it seems that in a democracy, there can be no higher value than protecting the citizens' right to protest, to get a redress of grievances, to assembly, to freedom of speech, as many have said. And other than life and limb, that's the main thing that they should be protecting. I think a very different message is sent with just even having that gear, whether it's out of sight or not. And the standard that you mentioned, Mayor Hales, of when is it necessary? And I think that we really need to look at that. When I think it's necessary is that the standard should not be related, as it seems to be, to is there a threat of somebody throwing something through a window. It should be, the standard of when it's necessary should be, is there any life and limb kind of danger involved here with protesters or anybody else? It should be people-oriented, not property-oriented, and not just control-oriented. And maybe they're making all the changes in that direction that we need to go in. But just in case they aren't, I think, the assumptions behind it are very much sends a message that we don't have the right to be there. I mean, when you see that, and when you see that response, whether they've got the gear on or not, it very much sends the message you don't have your constitutional rights. Protesting is criminalized. We're expecting a riot. And that's not, I think, the message that the city of Portland wants to send. If that's the police bureau culture, which we've talked about a lot, changing police bureau culture, I think that is something to look at. I'd like to see that reflected in the report. I would hope that they would bring up more of those kinds of cultural issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rayford, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Teresa Rayford, for the record, and just wanted to say hello again this afternoon to the commissioners and to the mayor. And I wanted to make a statement also, just to say ditto everything that Dan said. I trust him impeccably, his research and his advocacy. And I also wanted to say that I'm very disappointed that Chief O'Day has left this conversation, considering he had an earlier appointment with the people from Cop Watch that really do keep us on the streets informed of what's happening here. At least if he missed that appointment to come here, I would think that he would want to stay here to listen to the voices of the people. And I'm not saying that he won't watch the stream or this video later, but I think that it would have shown considerable leadership on his end as our new chief. And in regards to two more statements I wanted to make, and one was in regards to the provision. Amanda and I had spoke to her about it before you guys came back in. But in consideration to the time when the police or anyone in a commanding position decides or deems that it is necessary for a protest to end, a protest is freedom of assembly by the people who have a constitutional right to do so. So I don't think that it's at any point an obligation for a police force to end that opportunity for those people to freely assemble. And so to be directed into a kettle because there's a shift change or for any other reason that they deem that our time should be up is a very unconstitutional violation of our civil liberties. Also, when we're dealing with protesters, there's a difference between protesters and rioters. Freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom to take and occupy the streets because you're impassioned about something that is a world event and which we know now is a global event. That is our freedom also that a lot of people have fought for and that we've all worked to protect. Our parents before us and even our children after us, we would hope would have that type of integrity to protect that. We have to think a protest of people moving about because they're feeling a certain way is different than a riot. We had a riot the other night after the Ducks game. People were burning couches. We didn't burn couches. You know, you had a riot during Halloween out on the East Coast because of a pumpkin patch thing. That was a riot. That wasn't a protest. And so I think that when you talk about deadly force or some type of riot gear and things of that sort, you have to look at exactly what's happening. Is it a riot or is it a protest? Is it a deadly assembly? Is it going to injure people and not property? And then you make your assumptions based on that. And specifics to this issue that we're dealing with, one of the things that we've been dealing with since August when we had our first protest, people from the Black community and communities of color were so scared to take to the streets that they didn't. They did one time, and then after that, they wouldn't anymore. We had problems internally with our white allies and our Black community members fearing for their safety for being in the streets, fearing for their safety for being in front of cops. That is a continuous fear. If you haven't, check out the movie Selma. Research the stuff that not on the Hollywood version that happened to Dr. King and other people like Medgar Evers and people before us that fought for our rights. Look at how they were treated and think about what we're seeing when we are freely assembling and why we don't come together to use our voices. And then think about the outcomes that happen within our city and our nation when we don't speak out. And give yourself the opportunity to change that culture because you are in power.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you all. Okay.
Next three are Laura Vanderlyn, Loretta Austin, and Laquita Lanford.
Anyone else after that? Looks like someone who's not still here.
We can go with King Bishop Stiles.
Come on up. Welcome. Glad you're here.
Oh, she's here. Sorry. Can you hold on?
Oops. Sorry. Hang on, King. Welcome. Good afternoon.
Welcome, Mayor. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Laquita Lanford, and I'm really thankful to be able to sit before you. I've never been able to take this opportunity to do this. I've always, sat in the background and paid attention to what was going on. But what has really got me coming to visit with you guys, and I've met you several times, Mayor, over the last month and a half. And I feel like I'm comfortable enough to speak to you about some of the things that I've been experiencing. One, moving back to Portland last year, 2014, and I'm not a native of Portland, but I had lived here for 10 years, and so I really believe that this city is like my city because it taught me a lot of good values when I was about 19 to 28 years old is when I left. And one of the things in that first segment of my life was about, the culture and these words of diversity and these different things. And so I left to expand on, just to grow as a woman, to grow as a person, and, have all these different experiences in life. And so after going through, all of that, I had been thinking about moving back to Portland. I have family that had later on moved here when I was here, or my mom is here now. And so those were things that I think I really needed to do. So I made that decision. I think within the first week that I was here, I felt like I was in another world. I felt like I had moved from Houston, Texas. I was in California prior to that, and I had spent 6 months in Central America and believes my family's from Central America. But I just felt like the culture had really changed of people. No one's speaking to anyone. you know, everyone is like going to work and no one's paying attention. And I'm like, like the city has grown. It's a beautiful city to live in. But I just felt culturally we've been separated again as people. And so as things develop, I mean, I kept asking questions, and I want to say that I did come down as a concern and speak to the police chief after something. I don't know, he's not the chief, but, and I don't have his card. I have a couple other people's information that I gathered. But I was concerned because I live in a downtown Portland area, and there are a lot of homeless people that live in that area that I live in. And I think I proposed to you to really come out there on the streets and hang out with me for a day or two. And it's just really rough. And so what I had been seeing in Portland, which is public information, is Portland mugshots. And I just started to see a pattern of people because at one time I had worked for Central City Concern. And some of those people that were not getting assistance, they're still living on the street. And I've been gone for 10 years. And I'm like, well, what's going on around here? And I utilize services from Transitional Project as well. I've never been in jail. I haven't been on drugs or anything like that, but I'm a community-minded person, and I'm an advocacy for the things of human rights. And when it affects me, I put myself in that arena to have an understanding about what's going on. And that's what had led me to this conversation. And, you know, really thankful for Teresa Rayfield and all of the other members that have came as members of Don't Shoot Portland. And I stand really strong with that mission that we say as a community action plan, because that's what we're doing. We're taking action in the community that we live in and want it to be better. It's not always about protesting. The first time that I really didn't protest. I just kind of showed up afterwards by the Justice Center, and I was standing on the block, and I saw the protesters coming from around the backside, so I walked over, and I wasn't in no means way. I was there for supportive reasons, but I was just like standing around just everybody else. And after maybe 15 minutes of that, I started to see the riot police, you know, box us in. They had taken off the bridge, and you're not thinking about it when it's happening. You're like, okay, well, maybe this does happen. I don't know. And I started to look at it, and like 15 minutes after that, it was the announcement of everyone in the street is arrested. Everyone that's in the street is arrested, like several times. And the riot police or the police officers start to push us in. Everyone that's in the street. So I was standing next to a car, and I got on the sidewalk because I wasn't really like, you know, there were kids there. There were older people there. Like the news folks were there. I was terrified. Like I really thought that I was going to go to jail that night. I'm like, I just got a new job. You know, I don't want to like be, you know, not a part of that because I am here. And there was some information that came about. I know I'm speaking a little bit too. I'm just trying to get it off my chest. That I came down that Monday morning after we being, you know, arrested and everything. They did allow us to leave. I was scared, but then I was also empowered by the younger people that I saw, the young Black women and men that were there, we were all there for a reason in solidarity with Ferguson as that indictment that happened, and it was just so fresh to us. That's what everything that was going on. And Loretta, she was there, and I didn't know this young lady from like anything. I'd never seen her before, but I was so inspired by her message and inspired by what it was that she was doing for young Black people of color and for myself that didn't get that opportunity when I was 20 years old like her. And I got, you know, we got let go or whatnot, and I had to use the restroom. I was so nervous, and I went to Pioneer Square, and when I was coming out of the door, she was like just kneeling down, like she was frantic herself with the bullhorn in her hand, and I just comfort her, and we just talk, and I think everything happened for a reason in this life. If I had not been there for her and her being there for me, I wouldn't still be here because she was the person that encouraged me to continue to keep going with this movement. And as I've been a part of it, it's just been so many touching factors to what's going on with our population of people, of homelessness, of mental illness, and all of these different things in Portland. And it's just so hurtful that I'm collecting data. I'm advocating for homeless people at this point. I'm setting up a space for them to come, because they're not going to come down here with all their luggage and everything that they have, you know, to talk to someone that they don't know, that really haven't done nothing for them. So on my way here this morning, Leah, and she gave me her citation. This lady sleeps outside. She used to work for Monona County. She's 40 years old, and there were some traumatizing things that happened in her life. and now she's on the street. She wasn't an addict when she got on the street, but she's have to have like been in positions to put herself to make herself comfortable. And the police officer this morning gave her a citation for her sleeping outside underneath the bridge, a woman that's 120 pounds, that's a white female, and that has already served the state of Portland many, many years, and she put in a lot of time and efforts in her energy, and she's willing to talk to anyone. And so she gave me the card, and I brought that, and it's just like as it happened. I've also been in connection with Sisters of the Rose to get that safe space with them, with also talking to Eric Berry, who works down in the independent police review, from that first initial conversation that I had to have had with them to make a statement myself, because like I said, I had never been in the process, but thankfully for Teresa and that follow-up, I was able to get that done and get that on the record, and so now I know what to do. And there's several pictures. I'm compiling a documentary about the homeless people, you know, the hiddenness behind homelessness, and it's not always about a person being an addict. You know, people want help in the city, but if they're having to be out on the street and women have to get with a man that they don't know just to have a pallet to lay down, and I get to go to a warm bed every night, Mayor, that's not right for me.
Thank you so much for being here and for coming forward and being an advocate.
Thank you.
My name is Laura Vanderlyn, and I just want to thank you for letting us come here and speak. Thank you, Commissioners and Mr. Mayor. I have been an activist for a while. I have been streaming live and following Don't Shoot Portland. And I'm disturbed by the disparity that I see every day between Black people and, you know, in the Black community. I've witnessed the police here in Portland treat, like for instance, I'll give you an example. We were out one night and there was an incident where a young woman took out a knife and she threatened us with a knife. But we were walking, it was a small group of us. We weren't protesting, we were just walking from one place to another. We were gonna go eat. And a young woman took a knife out and threatened us with it. And then she was the one that initiated the call to the police. The police showed up and they don't seem to they just seem to be very, I'm sorry, I'm just at a loss of words.
Describe to us what happened. Just keep telling us what happened.
Yeah, well, what happened was this young woman, she was just wanting to, I'm not really sure what her agenda was, but she ended up calling the police, and it was really not a big deal. However, when the police got there, the police treated us with such hostility that it just kind of shocked me a little bit. When the police officer, and I have it on a stream, when the police officer spoke to me, he called me ma'am. When he spoke to Miss Rayford, and he seemed to know her by name, he didn't call her Miss Rayford, he called her Teresa. And he rolled his eyes, and he just wouldn't let her finish an entire sentence, and seemed just completely agitated when he hadn't even spoken to her. He was already agitated by the time he came up to speak to her. And they were under the assumption that we were protesting, and I don't know why they were under that assumption, because none of the officers really spoke to any of us. They only spoke to the young woman, and then they took all of her information, and I was just a little shocked because my skin color, I've never had that type of experience. You know, most of the time when a police officer approaches me, it's with some sort of respect. But to see how police officers approach my Black sisters, it disturbs me, as my children are Black. You know, and it disturbs me because I know my daughter, I have two daughters that are Black, and I know that they have gone through a lot with police officers. I have one in particular who I remember, this is in San Diego, this is not here in Portland, but it's not that different, you know? And what is happening here with the police department in Portland is parallel to what's happening in our nation. It's parallel, and I think if you really consider what is happening and really have consideration for your citizens, you have the power to make the change along with us. And that's all that I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
very
very
much.
much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, commissioners and Mayor Hayes. I would like to just put my name on record. My name is Loretta Austin, LaurettaAustin. I also would like to put on record that I deserve more than 3 minutes is because personally I am targeted by the color of my skin. So I'm not going to be running on any time frame or anything. I'm going to say what I have to say, and hopefully you guys will listen with an open heart and an open ear. I would first like to say that it's not the fact that Black people are compliant and unbothered. It's the fact that they are fearful to come out and protest, fearful of violent arrest and unnecessary brutal behavior. We know this because there is a history of oppression when it comes to the African American people. Also, I would like to specifically talk about the kettling in incident that happened whenever, I can't remember. We've had a lot of protests happen, but it did happen. Specifically speaking, the night of the kettle in and the mass arrest, police commanded people to get on the side of this, or get into the street, and that we were all under arrest. Without rights being read or a reason why we were all arrested, we were all massively detained and illegally arrested. As I encouraged people to get on the sidewalk, police officers arrested only people that were in the streets. So whoever gave them the command that we were all arrested and to get onto the street, it was very, I don't know what the word would be, but specifically when we got on the sidewalk, we were not arrested, or were not thought to be touched or to be put in the back of the truck and taken away. But they only arrested, the people that were arrested were the people that were in the streets. So definitely that. And also I would like to speak on the flash bombs and basically Portland protests in comparison to Ferguson protests have a reputation of a nonviolent and peaceful marches and protesting. However, the practices of the Portland Police Bureau are very much hostile and brutal. In no circumstances should police officers reflect a militaristic appearance and approach to peaceful protests. When I say that, we just led a protest on 82nd in Southeast Portland, and as the protest and the march started, we started off with one police car on duty or following us down the street, and literally 2 minutes after we had 10, 12 police, and it got hostile very quickly. However, nobody was throwing anything, nobody, it was a peaceful march, and it should have never gotten that hostile. Never should have got that hostile. Also, they were grabbing people, and definitely, it kind of just blows me how hostile these police officers can get, especially is because we are practicing our rights, We're not doing anything wrong, we're practicing our rights. So definitely I don't know, I just feel as though with the absence of the Chief of Commissioner, O'Day, I feel as though what is the purpose of us coming together and putting our concerns on file if he's not here listening to these concerns?
We're here.
Okay, well, I just wanted to make that known that he should probably be here next time that we do this, just because
And
they do have a direct
And also, he said in his recent, he got sworn in last week, and he also said that he's here to make a change, make a difference, and then we all got to do that together. And you're asking for community involvement, where the people of the community sit here, because we're not like all have been a part of protesting for many years. I'm only 38 years old, so like this is, I've had a lot of issues going on in my life, but this is the first time that I'm exercising and having an understanding of what it is that's going on. And so like that type of, hopefully, energy, we can get him to participate in our community as he said he would.
He will. All right, thank you.
That's it.
Thanks very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.
I'm very proud of the women in our community. Thank you for doing this.
The last two who signed up are King Bishop Stiles and Michelle Arata.
Please come on up. Thanks for waiting. Go ahead, Mr. Stiles. Put your name in the record.
So I'm King Bishop Stiles. I represent the Three Kings of Portland. Happy to be in front of you guys again. Thank you very much for your time. Forgive my ignorance, but I just need to ask a question. As far as this report is concerned, so your acceptance of it is basically an acknowledgement of communication. If that
It's the work group, the independent work group from the auditor's office and citizens put this report together. When we accept a report like this, it says, we have heard you. It doesn't necessarily say we endorse every last piece of what you've provided. And in fact, in this case, in my opinion, and we'll talk more about this later, but there are things that we need to talk about beyond this report.
Right.
So this is a communication. Maybe I'm restating what your point was, but this is a communication from this citizen work group to us.
Right.
And we're taking it in with your comments.
Great. Yeah, I just, I just wanted to make sure that I was completely clear about that. It seemed like there was not a complete understanding as far as
This is kind of an
verbiage.
unusual situation, so reasonable question. We don't do this that often.
Thank you. So another question that I have is that in the acceptance of this report, will you ask for more specificity within the report?
Yes, we have the opportunity to do that, and I think you'll hear several of us do just that.
Okay, great. So moving forward, I just really appreciate your questioning, Commissioner Fritz. Awesome. I think that it's very important for us to know exactly where we stand and what we will and won't accept, especially in this sensitive area of law enforcement and exercising rights. I would like to comment on the fact of a little something that Chief O'Day was speaking about. I was at the protest where the flashbang happened, and there were 3 people that were agitators of that flashbang happening. I was pretty much like right there on the front line. And myself and the 2 other kings were actually working throughout the protest to make sure that those people were known and that they were dispersed of without getting into any kind of physical confrontation. But it seemed that the police officers that we connected with didn't necessarily have an interest in making sure that they left. One of the things that spurred that flashbang on was an individual who I caught on camera dancing on top of a police cruiser. And the other kings and I actually had a discussion with this gentleman about, how we were to proceed within the protest, and that exactly what he was doing wasn't appropriate for exactly why we all gathered. So I think that that's important information for you guys to know. On top of that, with a lot of bad information that you guys have coming to you, just to give you some good information into the fact that that night, when the flashbangs went off, I located myself in a position where I could be seen and perceived as non-threatening, and contacted officers that assisted two separate people in being able to retrieve their cell phones that were in a space that the officers cordoned off. So, you know, it should be known that there are those officers that are there, that are respectful, and they are there and they are serving and protecting. With that said, in the vein of kind of this culture topic that's come up, it's something that we really get to look deep into. There's a statement that comes across that, you know, no matter where we come from, but especially in the issue of dealing with law enforcement, that there shouldn't be blanket statements put across as all officers being bad officers. But I think that it is imperative that we take a look at the fact that while there may be quote unquote good officers, if there aren't procedures and definitive actions to be taken, put in place, that we all on both sides can hold each other accountable and see things as being transparent. If we don't have those things in place, no one is going to be able to see the good that's coming out of the policing that's happening and that we're wanting to have. So that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Michelle Arata. Thank you guys for being here to listen to us. I am actually here to read a testimony from a community member who is not here, but first I'd like to speak on my own experience. I have a 14-year-old daughter. She's a freshman at Lincoln High School, and her friends we've been to many protests together, and they want to participate. They are vibrant. They want to see how the judicial to use their rights to free speech. And I have to call mothers, and I have to call fathers, and I have to beg, and I have to explain. They're not afraid of the protesters. They are afraid of the police. They're afraid of us getting arrested. They're afraid of how it might ruin their child's future. When I tell my parents I go to a protest, my parents are not afraid of the people I'm protesting with. My parents are afraid of what the police are going to do. And we've created this climate that protesters are evil. And they are not. Any violence I've ever seen has never come from my comrades, from my people that are sticking up for people who are oppressed, who don't have a voice, who have been marginalized, where social, injustice has occurred. What we are there to do is to bring about knowledge and awareness. And we have been labeled as something to be feared, when in reality, the only fear I've ever seen is the actions of the police. And every time, if I'm not able to go to a protest and my 14-year-old goes, I'm still afraid for her safety, not because of my friends standing together, but because of how the police treat us. That being said, I'd also like to read this testimony from a community member. I was at the Saturday demonstration where there's a confrontation with the police. I positioned myself between two planners while I watched, so I could have a safe vantage point to watch the police from. From my spot, I saw a gap between the police and the crowd as they withdrew. One member of our community was encouraging people to maintain the police line as they moved back. A small fringe group on the left-hand side of the crowd began to advance. Within moments, the police threw concussion grenades at the crowd. Two clearly targeting the leader, attempting to get the crowd to follow police instruction, and one or two which were thrown at provoking the group. I continued to watch the police as the crowd went into panic, and I was knocked off my feet by two panicking civilians. I stood back up to look back at the police to make sure no one was injured or in need of help. I watched as the police waited for the crowd to settle before charging the trampled and confused crowd. As I stood on the sidewalk, being mindful of the policy's request to vacate the street, keeping my arms non-threateningly placed at my sides, I watched on a group of police throw two members of the protest who were also standing on the sidewalk, who had not been provoking anyone, get thrown into the wall, and two of them were forcibly restrained against the wall by a group of about 5 officers. As I continued to stand and observe the situation, I was approached by 6 officers in formation. When they reached me, mind you, standing on the sidewalk with my hands exposed, I was immediately struck with a baton. The second time I was struck, I began to turn around. When I had rotated almost all the way around, one officer discharged pepper spray into my face. I was continuously struck in the back as I walked away from the police, made my way away from the police, and then handled the pepper spray situation. additional comments here. In all this experience, there's very little logic. The police did not effectively disperse the crowd. The use of force was unwarranted, and their application of crowd control weapons was ineffective and seemingly misplaced. The police, in this unjustified application of force, caused more injury than the protest had created. One person, as a result of being trampled, had their shoulder dislocated. Many others were injured, and many more were placed in danger. The police, in this instance, represented the only danger to civilians downtown that night. The police on that day were responsible for virtually all injury that night. To call any methods they used forms of crowd control is laughable. Crowd control exists to prevent disorder in rioting, and in this instance, we're nothing but provocateurs. I agree with that statement, and I would like my child's opportunity to protest to be protected and not a fear.
Thank you. Thanks very much. You all. Anyone else? Well, thank you all. I think it's in order that we take a motion. So if there's a motion to accept the report.
Move to accept the report.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Further discussion on that? Then roll call. We can make a statement as we do.
Fritz?
Thank you, everyone, for testifying, for the amount of time that you've put into clearly documenting your concerns. Thank you especially to the Citizens Review Committee, who put in hours and hours of oversight and good work. And so I appreciate that good work in accepting this report. I think I have learned a lot this afternoon, and I've learned that it certainly doesn't go far enough. I want to start out by stating very clearly that the Community Oversight Advisory Board, the application deadline has been extended until Friday, and we're particularly looking for people of color and young people to come and apply for that position. We've gotten over 80 applications so far, and we are still very much encouraging more. So if you are somebody that you know is willing to put in your application, the choices are made by a citizen selection committee. They are not made by the City Council except for one each. So there is that opportunity to participate very actively and intensively. It takes about possibly 10 hours a month, so it's a lot of work. And yet this is the most important thing that we're doing right now. And I appreciate all of the testimony. I am looking forward to getting the report from Mayor Hales about the policies that we discussed. The use of the concussion grenades, or the whatever else they're called, is new information to me. I was not aware that that's becoming a standard practice, and I'd like to get a briefing on what the policy is, why we do that. And we need to be clear that people do get to express themselves. They do get to assemble. We get to assemble. I have been to many protests in my life, and I want to be able to continue to do that. I want everybody to do that because it's part of who we are as Portlanders. It's part of who we are as a nation. And we need to recognize that we are doing some things right here, or at least we're not as awful as some of the other things that we've been reading about in the news. So there's that. We have recognized that we have problems, and we have committed to addressing them, and we're having this extended conversation. I appreciate you being here, the mayor, allowing people to have their say, and the involvement of the independent police review in the independently elected auditor's office is crucial. And we need to make sure that there's the appropriate checks and balances between the now independently hired compliance officer and the Community Oversight Board, IPR, CRC, and citizens at large to figure out what the questions are, figure out what the answers are, and make sure that we get it right. This report is part of that, and I'm appreciative of all the good work. Aye.
Fish?
Well, I want to thank everybody for spending the afternoon with us. Our day started at around 9 o'clock, and council started at 9:30, so we're approaching about 8 hours, but we're paid to do this. Each of you has taken time out of your schedule, your life, to be with us, so thank you. And I share what Commissioner Fritz said about the powerful testimonials and the information you've shared with us, and I thank you for that. A couple times the question has come up about what is our role in accepting this report. And I want to offer qualification. There are some reports that we commission as a council. And if we don't think the report addresses the question that we've presented, then we have the authority to reject the report. And that's really telling our team to go back and do it differently. When it's a report from an independent body that is giving us advice, I think it's better formed to accept the report, which is a ministerial act. It essentially means we're taking it and putting it in the record. But I'm not satisfied with this report. Now, the mayor is the police commissioner, and I'm looking forward to his comments about the areas where he'd like to see further work. But I think the record is pretty clear about the areas that need additional attention. And so this report, to me, is just a beginning. It is not the end, and I think it's incomplete. But I think it would be bad form to reject the report. I think the more respectful thing to do is to accept the report and to state our reservations and make it clear that this is a ministerial act. Commissioner Fritz mentioned the COAB, and my head is spinning these days with acronyms, but the Community Oversight Advisory Board. This is a big deal. This is a big deal, and we've spent a lot of time, and we've had a lot of hearings over the DOJ settlement and what we're trying to accomplish. And so it's very important we get people who are deeply committed to this reform work. And it was my honor about 10 days ago to announce that former Senator Abel Gordley had agreed to be my appointee, and she brings a lifetime of work around civil rights and justice and mental health issues. And I think she'll be a superb participant in that process, and I hope we get additional nominations and suggestions of people that are willing to make the deep commitment to that work. Been quite an extraordinary hearing, and I appreciate again everyone's time and commitment. Aye.
Novick?
I appreciate everybody's testimony. I appreciate the report. I think that although there could be more detail in the items of the report, I think it raises a number of interesting issues. One, I just want to touch on a couple of them. One, referring back to the previous conversation, I think between Mr. Handelman and the mayor, I think the mayor has actually made it very publicly clear that he's concerned about using hard gear and military-style clothing and equipment unless it is absolutely necessary. And I realize that the phrase absolutely necessary might seem vague to some people, but I think that to lay out some specific types of instances and say, here's where it might be necessary, would be a useful clarification. One thing, the recommendation I thought was interesting was number 8, publicize crowd expectations. PBB should publicize information about how it responds to crowd's conduct by utilizing social media, internet sites, and other outlets to reach the community. The work group believes this information might help avoid possible future conflicts if it's clear and available ahead of time. That strikes me as a very reasonable proposal, and I would imagine it might be, if they haven't already done this, but even if they have, it might be useful to revisit it. It might be a good exercise for the police bureau to go through, saying what do we want to tell people about what we do in terms of managing crowds. And I don't know whether anybody it might wind up being part of a crowd would read the information distributed. It would be very nice to know that it's there. So again, I do think that these are high-level recommendations, but I really appreciate the work that went into them. Aye.
Hales.
Well, I appreciate folks' testimony very much. I've now been commissioner in charge of the Police Bureau for a little more than 2 years. During that time, I've seen some wonderful things that I go out of my way to praise. Officers who've talked somebody in off a ledge or pulled them off a bridge when they were suicidal, or officers that have bought somebody groceries after they were arrested for $6.66 worth of shoplifting by a security guard in a grocery store. I've seen some great work by Portland police officers, and I go out of my way to praise that. I've seen some things that I have questions about, and I've seen things that I know I should change. And that list, or what's on each of those lists, changes over time because things happen. People do great work. Things don't go well. People make mistakes or violate policy. So I'm learning as I go along. Part of how I learn as I go along is I listen to the community, and I just want to thank you all for being here. I also want to thank you, Ms. Rayford, for organizing a really good forum on Saturday where, again, I got a chance to learn a few things. So I want you to know that you're being heard. I hope you feel that and know that the council is hearing you and that the police bureau is hearing you, because I'm the commissioner in charge, and I'll make sure of that. Secondly, There's some of my values that, as Mr. Novick just mentioned, that are already pretty clear. I share some of the concerns that have been raised here. There's some of the things in this report that I think we all say, yes, we should do that. And exactly how we do it, what is absolutely necessary. I will try, and I like your suggestion about situations. Here's a situation where it appears to me that using hard gear would be absolutely necessary. So we'll try to clarify that, because I do believe that reasonable people would agree that there are moments when police officers need to protect themselves, and there are moments when, by wearing that gear, they would intimidate people from exercising their First Amendment rights, and that there's a line between those two somewhere, and we should try to find that line. So this report doesn't go far enough, but I appreciate the good work. And there are other areas where we need to do more, and I've written down notes about a number of topics here, including the weapons issue and exactly what basis there is for ending a protest, or is there one? So you've made some excellent points, both in the formal presentations and in the individual testimony. You've got my commitment to keep following up on these issues, and also to get back to the members of the council that have raised questions about things that need to be followed up on here. One thing that you will see from me and from Chief O'Day is that we'll keep trying to develop good public policy in the light of day, out in public, and that's why you're going to see policy proposals up on the website and out for people to debate, and again, to give me as the commissioner in charge and us as the council that makes the rules good guidance about how we do this. So I think this is very helpful. I want to thank IPR and the volunteers that worked on this. More to come, and I look forward to hearing more from all of you as well. Thank you very much. Aye. And we are adjourned.